Hello everyone, this is Batkun. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The anime begins with a gamer who has no name. He finds himself disappointed because the servers of his game have just closed, and he would love to stay addicted to a game for at least 10 years. Therefore, in a very clever manner like any other gamer, he decides to look for a difficult game on the internet. A very strange page opens for him, and among the difficulties, he notices the Hell mode. This catches his attention very much, and upon seeing the great brutality of the existing classes, he decides to choose a summoner, a class that is much more difficult than the Demon King. But for this class, he must first start as a serf and then pass an exam. He wonders why he should choose this, but since it seems interesting, he accepts, and upon clicking, he is transported to another world where he is practically reborn, and his parents name him Alan. However, we discover that in order to level up, he needs 100 times more experience than the normal difficulty level. Furthermore, there is also no time limit, and if he manages to get out of this hell, he will certainly discover the secret of this world. Thus, time passes, and while he is eating, we discover his true name in the previous world. His name was Kenichi Yamada, a 35-year-old unemployed man with no social life and no girlfriend at all. Currently, he is 1 year old, and having reincarnated into this world saved his life. He finds himself grateful because even though he cannot speak due to being small, he can understand perfectly because everything is automatically translated. And just as the game stated, he will first start as a serf. His family cultivates open fields to pay taxes to the lord of these lands. His mother is named Teresia, and his father is Rodden. People who must be in their 20s give him a lot of love and affection. He pretends to be very tired so that they put him to sleep, and upon being left alone in the room, he tries to open the status window, but nothing happens. He has been trying ever since he arrived, but nothing works. He loves the life he currently has. He loves staying close to his mother's breasts and the very clean diapers, but he is a summoner and would like to perform some magic. Suddenly it works, and a book appears before him, but due to being surprised, he makes a noise, and they quickly go to see what is happening. Fortunately, the book disappears in time, and he pretends to be asleep again. His parents, now calmer, leave him alone again, and he takes advantage of the moment to summon the magical book once more. Noting that his class really is summoner, but his statistics are still quite low. He understands that he needs more experience to be able to increase his power, and the more he uses the summoning, the more experience he will obtain. But at the moment, he only has some beasts and insects. He finds it quite curious that his rank is H, and at that moment, the book lights up, and he notices what seems to be a message from the god of that world, who regrets not having sent the magical book sooner, but they had not yet finished testing his class, leaving his signature as Elmi, the god of creation. Furthermore, he understands that his class was still being tested, but he does not care. Now he wants to see his summonings and tries to do so, but he cannot achieve anything yet. And in that world, he unfortunately has no internet, so he needs to seek solutions on his own. He imagines that he must first create an insect to then summon it, and upon trying, a card appears, but he gets too excited, and his mother appears again. Fortunately, they fail to discover him, but due to this, he becomes very sleepy and decides to rest, lamenting that because he is 1 year old, he still does not have much energy. And on the following day, while his mother takes charge of looking after him, his father is working, and he takes advantage of the nap time to test his magic. This time he manages to summon a grasshopper, but he pays no attention to it. So he goes back to look at the magical book and notices that the H-rank insect has no name, and he names it Denka and perceives that below it blessings appear, which increase the speed and endurance of the grasshopper by 1 more, and he becomes quite impressed upon seeing that his statistics have also increased. But due to making too much noise, his mother enters to see him, and upon noticing the grasshopper, she kills Denka. Thus, the days went passing by, and he continues experimenting with his summoning magic. Now he possesses a new pet, a rat named Shoruki, which takes charge of spying for him, but it also possesses low intelligence. Currently, Alan has the capacity to store 10 summonings, and depending on the blessings of the monsters he stores, his statistics increase considerably, and upon storing 10 Shorukis, his strength increases by 10 more, making him much stronger than the children of his age. Leveling up would unlock many other skills, but unfortunately, it is 100 times more difficult, and he laments because in this manner, he will never finish. Then his father arrives home, and Teresia is startled to see him in that state, but he asks them not to worry since it is not his blood, and relates that he was hunting a boar, and asks Alan if he wants to see it. And he excitedly says yes, since he wants to see the first monster of that world. And while they head toward the body of the boar, his father points to giant birds. They migrate to the north at this time of year, so they are the ones that announce autumn, and tells his son that his name was inspired by these monsters, because they can go wherever they want, flying with their own wings to the end of the world, free and fortunate, but mentions that his mother got angry because he gave him a name inspired by monsters. A while later, upon arriving at the boar, Alan is very impressed since it is enormous. At that, Gerda announces to everyone that the hero of the day has just arrived. Rodden asks him not to exaggerate, and introduces his son to Gerda, who is quite impressed to see how Alan can speak despite being only 1 year old. Alan asks if that boar is a strong monster, and Gerda reveals that they needed more than 20 people to manage to bring it down, and that it is a C-rank monster. After 10 months, Alan finally reaches level 2 as a summoner. Upon seeing his statistics, he perceives that he can now create G-rank summonings. Furthermore, he can also synthesize them. And as if that were not enough, he now has more space, and also a book where he organizes his thoughts, and he becomes anxious to test the synthesis. But since he does not have enough mana, he goes to eat, and upon finishing, he runs quickly to test it, but remains without mana. However, he does not think of stopping, and if he cannot synthesize a monster, then he will create a G-rank one. But he also fails due to lack of mana, and without further options, he goes to sleep. Thus, time continues to pass, and now Alan, at 3 years old, remains at level 2 of creation, and has barely managed to use his synthesis 20 times. So he uses synthesis to mix the monsters, thereby creating a new G-rank bird, whom he names Chappie. It possesses the imitation skill, which can be quite useful for confusing enemies using its voice. Then he takes out from his storage Pianta, a frog with the provocation skill that he can use as bait, and Magusuk, a mole capable of digging, very useful for making traps. He becomes very excited because the G-rank summonings are quite useful, and whoever masters the statistics of their summonings and their own masters the game. But he ends up falling into the tunnel of Magusuk, lamenting because there is still a long way to go before being able to face the monsters. He notices that it is already 3 in the afternoon, and remembers that she will arrive at any moment. And suddenly Krina arrives. She already arrives asking that they go play. She is the daughter of his neighbor, and she is the same one who gives him a beating when they play knights, making him wonder where she gets so much strength, while he has the bonuses from his summonings. After that, we discover that Teresia is pregnant again, and she asks Krina to return home quickly because it is already getting dark. She obeys and says goodbye to Alan, who is exhausted on the ground. Later, while they have dinner, Alan alerts his father that he will take charge of helping him, since his mother's belly is much larger. His parents are quite impressed, while he thinks that even without the summonings, his strength is already almost that of an adult. His parents respond that the best thing is for him to continue playing with Krina, because he is still a child, and that the day will come when he will have to help him in the field until he gets tired. Alan thinks that he is right, since it is almost impossible to rid oneself of the status of a serf. He feels that he should not speak in such an irresponsible manner, so he accepts to continue playing. They ask why lately he keeps throwing stones at a tree, and he responds that he had said before that monsters could appear outside the house, and in this manner, he can protect his mother. His father becomes very emotional, but in reality, he is doing this to verify if he could obtain other skills. At that, Rodden mentions that he is anxious to see his appraisal ritual, recounting that when they turn 5 years old, their god will see what gifts they possess, and if he has any, he will be able to escape the field. Thus, time passes, and upon the arrival of winter, he wants to begin practicing with his summonings, but Krina arrives to bother him, and he begins again to practice the sword with her. But the truth is that he only takes a beating. His father arrives mocking him. On the other hand, his mother gets frightened upon seeing Denka, and ends up falling to the ground. Alan takes charge of hiding it quickly. But now the baby is coming into the world. Alan takes charge of heating the water, and upon alerting his father, he wonders what he should do now. However, fortunately, Matilda, Krina's mother, arrives at the place together with Gerda and her daughter. Matilda announces that the men must leave, and removes all of them from inside the house. She takes charge of the entire birth, and at dawn, the boys wake up upon hearing the crying. Upon entering the room, Teresia alerts Rodden that it is a boy, and asks what name he wants to give him. He names him Mash. Teresia likes the name, even though she wonders if by chance it was also inspired by another monster. Rodden becomes very nervous, but surprisingly Teresia just laughs. Meanwhile, Alan wonders why he reincarnated. He wanted an ultra-difficult game. It was something he desired with all his might. His previous life was horrible, with no money, no degree, no girlfriend, no nothing, besides the desire to grow stronger in his game, or at least that was his plan. His mother asks him to come closer, and upon touching his little brother, the baby begins to cry. Teresia alerts him that he should not worry, while Alan thinks that he does not know how he will do it. But he would like to remove his parents from the status of serfs, and he will take charge of this task. Then, as the years pass, he turns 5 years old, and asks his father how an appraisal ritual works. He explains that when it is performed, if they discover that he possesses any gift, he will be able to leave the status of a serf. However, he will have to have a lot of patience, because since they began to clear those lands, countless children were born, and now the majority are also 5 years old, just like him. As they move forward, they meet Krina and her father, and everyone together proceeds to the city of the commoners. Krina is very excited, still hoping to obtain the swordsman gift, so as to become a knight. Upon arriving at the church, Alan notices that there are many children, and furthermore, some look very clean and have better clothes than theirs. He wonders if by chance those are commoners, but at that moment, he notices how a group of people observing him comments that he has black hair, which is quite rare among serfs. A while later, the officials welcome the future heroes of those lands, and make it clear that an opportunity will be given to each one, because even a hero of the nation can be born as a serf, like the Saint Klesha who was born a commoner, or the sword master Dover who was born a serf. Alan becomes quite impressed, understanding that there must exist a low ranking for the classes of hero and master of arms, and now the conditions of the game are reproducing themselves in that place. Then they enter the church where Alan notices 3 statues, which represent the deities of that world, and in the middle of them is Elmi, the god of creation, the same one who sent him a message when he was 1 year old. At that, the ritual begins, and the first to go up is the son of the city chief named Paromos. Upon touching the crystal, the priest sees his statistics and announces that he is a merchant. His father becomes excited because commerce runs in his blood, while Alan notices that each gift also possesses a ranking, so he takes the opportunity to write it down in his book, which he notices that only he can see. Afterward, another boy goes up who leaves crying upon discovering that he does not possess a gift, and among those appraised is Dagora, the only one so far with one of his skills at rank A, and furthermore, he possesses the axe gift and becomes quite excited. When the commoners finish performing the ritual, the turn of the serfs arrives, who do everything very quickly. Finally, the turn of Krina, daughter of Gerda, arrives, who excitedly runs, and upon doing so, she illuminates the entire place, and the priests are impressed upon seeing the plate. Krina, without understanding anything, asks what the result was, and the priest tells her that she won the ultimate prize. Since Krina's gift is Sword Master, everyone is impressed and excited upon discovering that in their village there is a Sword Master. Gerda becomes emotional, but Krina not so much, because she hoped to be a knight, while Alan already expected something like this, otherwise, nothing could explain her exaggerated strength. Finally, the turn of Alan arrives, who advances thinking that finally the moment has come for his parents to discover that he is the summoner. But upon touching the crystal, it goes dark. Alan wonders what is happening. However, suddenly everything illuminates with a force superior to that of Krina. The glow pushes him, but he stands up quickly to see the result with his father. Nevertheless, the priest alerts that Alan does not possess any gift. Alan cannot believe it, wondering what is happening, and upon seeing the plate, he understands that his gift is completely illegible. He begins to complain mentally to the god of creation, asking how he will be able to say that he is the summoner. However, his father holds him by the shoulders, and with great calmness alerts his son that it is time to return home. And at night when they are together, Rodden makes it clear that he remains proud of him, even without possessing any gift. Meanwhile, Alan thinks that even though they are poor and dirty, he feels joy for having been born into that family. Little do they know that everyone is younger than him in reality. Now, while everyone is sleeping, he takes a look at his magical book, understanding that he is the only one who is in hell mode in that world, and that all his statistics are in rank E, remembering that all those appraised must also be at level 1 just like him. But the rank of his skills was superior, and this is proof of his evolution potential based on leveling up. He wonders why he has everything so low, since even though he understands that for him, it is 100 times more difficult to level up. This must also mean that it is 100 times more worth it. So it is not fair that his gift is illegible, and complains again to the god, making it clear that he will do his best, but also thinks that he will keep complaining every night. After that, while everyone walks together, Alan asks his mother why his father looks so serious, and she responds that he arrived late the previous night, and has been that way ever since. A while later, upon arriving at Krina's house, she excitedly asks Alan if he knew that being a sword master is stronger than being a knight. He feigns surprise but already knew this. Matilda arrives with a very strong drink, which the village chief gave them as a gift. Rodden becomes excited, but then becomes serious again. Upon observing him, Alan wonders if by chance his father is upset because Krina is a sword master while he does not possess a gift, but understands that his father is not that type of person. After noticing, Gerda alerts Rodden that if he continues with that face, the drink will make him feel very unwell. Rodden responds for him to stop talking nonsense, but Gerda comments that it seems he is not happy with them. Rodden furiously responds that he is, and that he is very happy to know that Krina possesses an exceptional power. Then he asks why Rodden wants to cut ties with them, and Rodden says that it is not that he wants to do that, but Krina has an exceptional talent and might end up becoming a noble. So the ideal thing is that she does not continue walking with miserable people like them. Everyone present is left unable to believe it, and Gerda makes it clear by saying that this changes nothing. For his part, Alan feels that it is time to intervene, so he asks Krina if they should stop the two of them. She gets very excited, but the mothers step ahead and give them a beating. Alan is quite shocked, and asks Matilda if his father and Gerda always fight. She reveals that it has always been that way. However, they calmed down a bit after the children were born. But before that, they fought over anything. Teresia reveals that the four are friends since they were born, and 10 years ago when they learned of those lands, everyone moved together to clear them. So they joined forces to build their houses. While they talk, Gerda and Rodden remember the moment when they built the houses together. So now calmer, they drink to make a toast. After the days passed, one certain day they alert Gerda that a knight is looking for Krina, who at the moment is fighting with Alan. After that, upon arriving in the city, everyone is talking about Krina. However, Dagora, the boy from before, asks Alan what a giftless person is doing in that place. Krina intervenes to defend him, making it clear that Alan is someone very strong. She tries to bite him, but Gerda holds his daughter back in time. At that, the village chief announces that the knights are already arriving, and we are introduced to Zenov, the captain of the knights who is also a sword master. Upon meeting with the village chief, he quickly sends for Gerda and Krina. Her father is a bit nervous, but Krina is very excited, while Alan, for his part, thinks that it would be very sad if they took Krina from the village, especially now that she is a sword master. However, suddenly Gerda alters himself, explaining to Zenov that his daughter has never held a real sword, and has barely completed her 5 years, which is why what he is proposing is complete madness. Zenov responds that since she is a sword master, everything will be fine and they must perform the test. Otherwise it will be considered that they deceived the knights and the village chief, and manipulating the appraisal ritual is a sin punished with death. Alan feels that the situation is getting strange, while Zenov orders the vice captain to prepare, since they need to verify if the girl really possesses that gift, and for that, they must do a sword duel. Everyone in the village is quite impressed, while Gerda asks the captain to reconsider, but Zenov makes it clear that if Krina does not fight, he will execute both of them. At that, a knight stands right beside her, and Krina, upon seeing the sword, asks if she can take it. He confirms, and Krina, excited, alerts her father that she is going to fight, causing him to almost have a heart attack. After that, she is before the vice captain of the knights, who introduces himself as Labrin. The combat begins, and Krina, without wasting time, charges at Labrin, surprising everyone upon seeing that the little girl can manage a sword of that size. The detail is that when Labrin gets serious, with just one kick, he throws her against the wall. Gerda tries to intervene, but the knights restrain him, just as they do to Alan and his father. Alan becomes frustrated because even though Krina possesses a great gift, she cannot compete with the actual experience that the vice captain possesses. However, at that moment, Krina stands up again and begins to release an aura from within herself. The vice captain becomes very nervous, and Krina quickly charges at him, who now can do nothing but defend himself. He understands that Krina possesses an extra skill, and then the little girl breaks his sword with a sword strike. Zenov ends the combat while a very smiling Krina thanks the vice captain for the fight. commenting that he is quite strong to be an old man, but in reality, he is only 24 years old. Fortunately for them, Jirda becomes very surprised to see that his daughter really is a sword master and begins to pat the head of the knights. And upon picking his daughter up in his arms, she begins to laugh. At that, Zenov approaches them, making it clear that he recognizes Krina's power. He apologizes for the rudeness, but Jirda continues to demonstrate irritation. However, Zenov mentions that it is time to talk about the future of his daughter and makes it clear that if he wishes, his friends can accompany him. And now, upon finding themselves in the house of the village chief, Alan notices that Jirda is still furious, and this is quite understandable. However, he wonders what the axe boy is doing in that place. But his thoughts are interrupted by Zenov, who introduces himself again and alerts them that he is there by order of the lord of those lands, who wished to verify that the ritual had not been manipulated. He comments to the village chief that normally the village takes the name of the chief, but since a sword master was born in that place, the lord of these lands now wishes for the village to be called Krina. The village chief accepts without complaining, while Jirda is jaw-dropped because he is very excited about this idea. Zenov reveals that almost 3 years ago, a sword master was born into the family of a count. However, Alan finds this curious, and while stealing fruit, thinks that sword masters can only be born among serfs, commoners, and men. Zenov continues relating that this master entered the service of the royal family, but his performance was not up to the mark, and upon making him repeat the ritual, they ended up discovering that he was merely a swordsman. Because of this, they discovered that several nobles had forged the results of the gifts. For this reason, the royalty began to distrust the results of the ritual, which is why he apologizes again to Jirda for having put his daughter to the test. Jirda accepts the apologies, while Zenov reveals that Krina will enter the academy when she completes 12 years of age, to later serve the royal family. At that, the axe boy asks if he can become a knight if he enters the academy, causing his father to almost have an attack, and quickly apologize to Zenov. He asks who that boy is, and his father introduces him, making it clear that he is an axe user and wants to become a knight. Upon hearing this, Zenov responds that he will send a tutor to that village, and expects that the boy will strive to manage to enter the academy. At that, Krina alerts Alan that he will also have to study with her. But Dogora intervenes, alerting her that he does not possess a gift, but Krina tells him to shut his mouth, because her friend Alan is very strong. Meanwhile, Alan thinks that a 5-year-old boy is insulting him. His 5-year-old friend is defending him, and in reality, he is 40 years old. At that, Zenov notices Alan's black hair and eyes. Rodin comments that that is his son, while Jirda introduces his friend Rodin. Zenov, impressed, stands up asking if he is the boar hunter. He apologizes for committing an imprudence, since he almost failed to properly greet the hero of that village. Rodin asks why he calls him that, and Zenov reveals that the lord of those lands becomes delighted to receive every winter the meat of giant boars that the village sends. He knows that Rodin runs great risks by hunting them, so he congratulates him for his great work and expects him to receive the praises of his beloved lord. Rodin accepts and shakes his hand, and a while later says goodbye to his friends. As they head home, it is commented how a serf like him can win the recognition of others. So even if life is very hard, they must continue living with their heads held high and with dignity. Alan understands this. After all, his difficulty is in hell mode. Before returning home, Alan reveals to his father that he has a present for his mother and for Mash, and asks if perhaps he should not do that. But at that, his father begins to laugh, revealing that he also did the same thing. Time passes, and after a good while, exactly 2 years, our Alan is excited, because he finally managed to raise his summoning level from level 2 to level 3, unlocking now 30 spaces to store summoning, in addition to the reinforcement skill. And as if that were not enough, now he can summon F-rank creatures, and his blessings are 1.5 times stronger. But he still does not have time to test this. And while he is gathered with his family at night, we discover that his father and his mother literally do not have a TV at home, because they are already on their way to their 3rd child. Mash is excited, wanting to know if it will be a boy or a girl, while Alan is excitedly washing the dishes quickly to go perform his tests. Teresia comments to Mash that by the intensity of the kicks, it seems like it will be a girl, and if that is the case, she will be the one to choose the name. Rodin asks what name she is thinking of giving, and when she is about to respond, Alan's book opens, and he receives a letter from Elmi and reads it in a low voice. But his parents overhear, warning them that they cannot name the little sister Elmi. because that is the god of creation. Teresia mentions that he is quite strange on that day, so to change the subject a bit, she asks the father what happened to the injury on his arm. Rodden responds that he overcame the trial of the gods while he was hunting, and explains that sometimes when he leaves the house, his injuries and fatigue disappear completely. Alan understands that practically he leveled up, but the inhabitants of that world call this the trial of the gods. His father is a veteran boar hunter, and even though he cannot see his statistics, he assumes he must possess a very high level. In Alan's case, the summoning level increased, but he remains at level 1, and he will never obtain experience if he does not hunt monsters. Unfortunately for him, serfs cannot leave without permission, with only one exception: hunting. Therefore, he alerts his father that he also wants to go hunting, but Rodden refuses because hunting is no joke, and that is already difficult enough for him. Imagine looking after a child. Alan goes away in silence, and a while later, while he is in his room, he understands that the notification he had received before from Elmi was because of his constant persistence in all the complaints he sent. So finally his gift will no longer be illegible, and the Pope received an oracle about his new class. Alan knows that his skills are of rank E, but now he can see the evolution of his statistics, and in magic and intelligence, he possesses rank S. However, he also counts on great speed, strength, and charisma, possessing all of them in rank A. He finally feels satisfied because all his effort is starting to give rewards, and now it is time for the test. The first thing he does is reinforce Denka, becoming surprised upon seeing that its statistics really increase considerably. However, this changes absolutely nothing about the bonuses he receives, so he summons an improved Denka, which remains the same size but with a very imposing posture. However, his tests are interrupted by his mother, who is scared to death upon seeing it, and with a stomp sends it to the Isekai again. On the following day, we discover that the reinforcement does not disappear when the summoning goes back to being a card, which means that for Alan, it is worth it to reinforce the largest possible number of summonings. At that, he says goodbye to his father and then goes to hang out the laundry, while he remembers that in these last few days he made countless combinations, but did not manage anything good. However, upon trying again, mixing an F-rank insect card and an F-rank bird card, he manages to summon a plant of the same rank. He finds it quite curious the fact that he can summon plants, and upon seeing its blessings, he becomes very excited because it increases his magic and power. And thanks to this improvement, he will be able to continue creating many more cards, because at the pace he was going, it would take many years to continue leveling up. He summons the plant to see its special technique, but perceives that it is a small apple and names it a Po. He comments that it seems not to have been made for combat, but at that, the apple shows its statistics to Alan, and he sees that its special technique is fragrance. He asks for it to show the technique, and at that, it plants itself in the ground, and a small sprout is born from there. Alan becomes disappointed, wondering if it is making fun of his face, but at least the garden will be very fragrant. However, he complains because he did not reincarnate to become a gardener. At that, his mother calls him to eat, and desperate, he orders a Po to go back to being a card, but the apple does not listen to him, and when his mother arrives, she notices the sprout and comments that it has a very pleasant smell, but finds it strange because she did not remember that being there. Meanwhile, Alan asks what that thing is, since it serves for nothing other than granting bonuses. So time passes, and now we see him training with Krina, where as usual he is taking a beating, but she, a bit surprised, asks if by chance he grew stronger. He opens his magical book and perceives that he is now at level 3 in swordsmanship, and thanks to this expansion, he possesses much more strength and vitality. So he comments to Krina that perhaps he is just a little bit stronger. While looking at his magical book, he thinks that Pak is the only creature that possesses an offensive technique, and even if he wants to test it, he cannot do that to any human. At that, he observes Krina as if he were thinking about something, but thinks it is better not to get into that madness. At dusk, we see him throwing stones at a trunk. He has already done this thousands of times, and Mash alerts that he is already quite tired. Alan does this to see if he can raise some level in his statistics, but he has achieved nothing until now. Yet he finds it very difficult to stop after having already started, because one never knows which throw will make him level up. But Mash leaves him alone and approaches all the sprouts of a Po, while Alan upon seeing him thinks that if it continues that way, in the end, he will end up creating a forest. However, he discovered that thanks to a Po's technique, his mana recovers in 5 hours instead of 6. Then, on a very rainy night, Everyone is worried because Rodden took too long to return. However, at that moment, they hear a commotion, and upon leaving the house, they see Gerda with the rest of the villagers, carrying a gravely injured Rodden. Upon arriving home, Gerda reveals that a boar finished him. He is extremely weak, and they cauterized his wound to manage to close it. Gerda comments that he is no longer in danger, thanks to the use of Amura's flower. Teresia asks how they managed to obtain such a valuable flower, and Gerda relates that the captain of the knights, to apologize for what had happened before, gave him some gold coins, and he used the money to buy the flower. But at that, one of Gerda's companions comments that everything is the fault of that commoner, and the rest of the men begin to agree with him. The confusion wakes up Mash, and Alan takes him back to bed. She alerts the others that she will stay with Rodden, and recommends that everyone go rest without committing any madness. And a while later, when they are left alone, Alan asks Gerda if what they are saying is true, and he reveals that a few days before, the village chief asked the commoners to participate in the hunt, because boar meat is very important to them. The largest part goes to the lord of the lands, while the remainder is divided among the others. However, commoners do not hunt on their own, because it is very dangerous. Even so, the serfs continue hunting to help people survive. Alan then asks why the commoners accompanied him, and Gerda comments that most likely it was because a hero was born among the serfs. He remembers that the captain praised Rodden in front of everyone, which probably reassured the village chief, making him think that the commoners would not be in danger thanks to Rodden. He and Rodden were against the idea of taking amateurs along, but unfortunately, they could not disobey the village chief, and they had only a few days to prepare. However, the commoners simply pretended they were helping, because they could not stand the idea of serfs being their instructors. And when the moment of truth arrived, despite the commoners having the easiest task, they ended up fleeing in desperation, causing the entire plan to go down the drain. So when the boar was about to kill those commoners, Rodden stepped in front and received the attack. In the end, they managed to defeat the boar, but at a great cost. Gerda alerts that on the following day he will bring Rodden's portion, and asks for them to be strong. On the next day, Rodden wakes up quite startled, but upon seeing his family, he calms down. Meanwhile, Alan wonders what he has been doing all this time. He only thought about growing stronger and never worried about the life of his family. He treated everything as if it were a game, but those people live as best they can in that cruel world, and now it is time for him to do something about it. At that, Gerda arrives with Rodden's portion and makes it clear that he should not worry because he will take care of his family during the winter. Rodden expresses gratitude, but Alan intervenes, asking his father to allow him to protect his family, swearing that he will do his best. Everyone is quite surprised to hear this. And now we see Alan performing tasks that before were done by his father, leaving everyone impressed upon seeing how strong he is. It is no longer time to continue behaving as if he were a child. On the other hand, there is Krina, the future heroine of that village, so there is no problem if he also stands out a little. To obtain more strength, he needed to sacrifice a part of his magic blessing, because at that moment, his family was his priority. He alerts his mother that now it is time to go harvest potatoes with Gerda, and upon meeting with him, Gerda teaches how the procedure works. Upon doing this, Gerda is shocked, perceiving the great potential of Alan. He knew he was strong, but did not imagine that much. A while later, he is in the storehouse, while he thinks that 60% of the harvests belong to the village chief, so there is still a long way to go before they can manage to survive the winter. But suddenly the village chief and his son enter his house. His son is the one responsible for Rodden having been left in that state. The village chief apologizes and then orders his son to do the same. The boy quickly kneels down and begs for forgiveness, but Alan is very irritated, because apologies are not enough. Rodden makes it clear that he must take more care next time. Alan is delighted to see the gold that his father received, while the boy expresses gratitude for having been forgiven. But Teresia is furious because her husband almost lost his life, and even though their status is low, they also possess a family, so they expect that they never forget that. Then the remainder of the serfs arrives to visit Rodden, which makes the environment a bit more lively. Teresia, grateful, asks them to be careful with her husband because he remains injured. A while later, we see Alan preparing an entire field. He summons some frogs to use their provocation, and in this manner, he will attract some ducks to capture them, since if he manages to catch around 50, they will be able to pass the winter without problems. However, he perceives that the provocation is not working and wonders if it perhaps has limited range. He thinks that he will have to rethink the idea. But at that moment, a wild bird appears. He becomes very excited. However, upon perceiving that it is the bird that his father pointed out that day, he begins to worry because that is a rank C monster, the very monster that inspired his name. It easily devours the frogs, so Alan decides to make a strategic retreat. However, upon taking a look at his statistics, he decides to try to defeat it, and after throwing a stone at the giant bird, he charges at it with his wooden sword. Nevertheless, the bird defends itself, but then he summons the Pox. He puts their technical skill to the test. However, it does not work that well either. He tries to attack again, but perceives that now the bird is much stronger, understanding that upon losing his summonings, he also loses his reinforcements. Unfortunately, now he is much weaker and feels that the summoner class is a true terror. For this reason, the bird prepares to devour him, but he manages to prevent it at the last instant. Fortunately, Alan manages to dodge the attacks and uses his secret weapon, which consists of insects that stick to the bird and drain all its energy. It begins to weaken, so Alan begins to use more Pox, managing to debilitate the monster. He understands that despite it being weakened, because he lost the blessings of many summonings, to defeat that bird he will need to remove all its energy. So he continues attacking with his summonings, and after landing a sword strike, he finally manages to defeat the bird, thereby defeating his first monster and gaining 100 experience. He becomes very excited and satisfied, and after a while, he takes the corpse of the creature to his family, where his parents and his friends are jaw-dropped. Krina comments that he is very strong, while Mash begins to cry because he is scared to death. Rodden asks Alan if he is well, and he responds that he is great. Gerda observes the bird and makes it clear that he is very impressed by him having defeated this creature using only a wooden sword and stones. However, he also notices some bites and asks Alan if he bit the monster. Alan responds that he had no control, leaving Gerda quite surprised, so he stands up and alerts Rodden that he will take care of draining the blood of the monster. However, Alan also notices a bump on Gerda's head and thinks that it was probably Krina who gave him a beating. Then Gerda asks Alan to accompany him, and a while later, after draining the blood of the creature, explains that without blood it yields about 20 kilos of meat, and half of that is edible. Furthermore, its wings are also worth money. But unfortunately, he still needs to deliver 60% of that to the village chief. This guy is the biggest partner of everyone there. Alan is left unable to believe it, asking if this rule also applies to wild monsters, and Gerda responds that unfortunately yes, except for rank E monsters like horned rabbits. Gerda removes the mana stone from the monster, and explains that the higher rank stones must be delivered to the chief, since serfs like them would not even know what to do with that. However, since Alan is a very small boy, who had to face that monster because his father Rodden is gravely injured, he recommends that Alan negotiate with the chief. Alan finds this quite interesting, and thus whispers some mysterious things. After that, when they meet with the village chief, he demonstrates being very excited about that great prize. But at that, Gerda comments that they are going to pluck all its feathers, and asks if they will be able to keep the remainder. But the village chief responds no, because the lord of those lands wants them to deliver more and more meat. Upon hearing this, Alan understands that it was for this reason that they allowed the commoners to participate in the hunt. And meanwhile, Gerda makes it clear that they will deliver only the mana stone and the feathers, since because of their demands, the great hero of the village, Rodden, was gravely injured, and now his family needs to have something to survive during the winter. Upon hearing this, Alan begins his acting, saying that his stomach is rumbling with hunger. The two get into character, so they manage to convince the village chief, who lets them keep the corpse of the bird because he owes a lot to Rodden. Alan takes advantage of the moment and expresses gratitude, commenting that from now on he will be able to keep the meat of the monsters, provided he delivers the feathers and the stones. The village chief is quite surprised to hear him, while Alan thinks that the time has come to deliver the final blow. Gerda joins the acting, commenting that one does not capture birds like that one every day. The village chief knows this, so he can keep the meat if he manages to capture more of those creatures, leaving the two very excited because their plan worked out perfectly. And after that, a good amount of time passed, and we discover that now Alan has been hunting one every 3 days, and at this moment, it is the first time that he manages to defeat 2 birds together without losing any summoning. He managed to defeat a total of 10 of these birds, so now that he obtained the 1000 experience, he reaches level 2. And upon seeing his statistics, he is marveled, because his stamina and his magic skyrocketed with the level up. but he perceives that leveling up also does not improve his skills. Even so, he is very happy because he finally managed to rise to level 2, and his attributes really increased considerably. It has already been 6 years in that world, and finally he managed to rise to level 2, which makes him think that it is already time to tell his family about his gift. Upon returning home, his father is quite surprised, seeing that he carries 2 birds, but Rodden perceives something, and even thinks about asking, but prefers to say nothing, asking him to forget it. Right at this moment, Krina arrives, and Alan goes to practice with her, and while doing so, he thinks that he must continue leveling up. And now he will have to hunt about 20 birds to reach level 3. But it is also not as simple as he thinks, and he hopes to manage it before the year ends. But since he is very thoughtful, Krina ends up giving him a beating, and later says goodbye to Alan. During the night, he gathers with his parents, revealing that when he completed 1 year, he received a divine oracle from Elmi, and reveals to them that he received strength and wisdom. But his trial would be much more difficult than that of 100 people together. His father comments that he had already noticed this, that on that day he passed through the first stage, and remembers that before he had a scar on his face, which disappeared on that day. Alan had not noticed this, and his mother asks about the ritual he needs to perform. Alan comments that he received the oracle from Elmi about 2 months ago, but his father asks that he refer to the god of creation with more respect. Alan apologizes, explaining that in the ritual, his attributes were determined as low because his slow evolution was taken into account. For this reason, no gift appeared, because his is totally new. Rodden, surprised, asks what his gift is, but Alan plays dumb, responding that he still does not know, since he feels that it is not yet the moment to tell, because he does not know what they would think if they saw him summon a creature. At that moment, his mother embraces him, commenting on what he should have told before, since from a very small age he always trained throwing stones, imagining that he did this to overcome the trial that God imposed on him. Alan asks her not to worry, while Rodden asks what he thinks of doing now. Alan makes it clear that he will face the trial head-on, and that he will do everything that is necessary to overcome it. His father already expected this answer, so he makes it clear to his son that he must not hesitate to tell in case he has any problem. Why could they think that he is blaspheming against God? Then he asks his son if he can tell Gerda. He obviously just wants to brag. Alan responds that if he wants to, he can do that. Thus, time passes and winter arrives, when Alan goes together with Gerda to make his first purchases. They take meat from the birds and from the boars to exchange for other products. But while advancing, Alan asks what the difference is between a commoner and a serf, and he explains that commoners do not need to deliver the 60% like them, but they have to pay a tax every year. Alan then acts curious, asking if a serf can become a commoner, and Gerda reveals that this can be done by paying 10 gold coins, or that the lord of those lands delivers the title as a reward, but he does not know if this last part really is true. After that, they arrive to negotiate, where Alan follows all of Gerda's steps, and thus the day goes passing by while he learns a little, understanding that a piece of dried meat provides firewood for 4 days. Now is the time to study the market a bit, so he begins to go alone, asking the merchants how much things cost, and for what other types of objects they could exchange the meat. In his book, he writes down all his studies, and understands that 1 gold coin is equivalent to 100 silver coins, 1,000 copper coins, and 10,000 iron coins, and a small bag of meat that he exchanges is equivalent to 1 silver coin. Therefore, if he wants to obtain 50 gold coins, he will have to kill 500 birds, meaning that with a lot of effort, in a matter of a few years, he will be able to achieve this. Afterward, he goes to a potion shop, where he asks for mana potions, but the bald man states that he does not have such expensive things. Then he asks for healing ones, and he points to the medicinal plants, and Alan takes the opportunity to draw them in his book, so he can collect them later. Next, he asks for the Muras flower, but the agitated old man states that he does not have it, and that he would not even have money to buy that, recounting that the last time he saw one was a very long time ago. He asks if by chance he is referring to Lord Gerda, and the bald man confirms, revealing that that old man arrived there like a wild beast, demanding the best medicine. And at that time, he had a flower by pure coincidence, and Gerda demanded that he sell it for 3 gold coins instead of 5. Furthermore, he wanted to pay on the following day. Obviously, the bald man refused, but Gerda insisted so much, saying that it was to save his best friend, that in the end, the bald man ended up yielding. He was terrified of the idea that he really might not receive the payment. Even with Gerda paying, he still took a loss. Alan is quite surprised to see what Gerda did for his father, and delivers a small bag of meat to the bald man as a present. He asks why Alan is doing this, and he makes it clear that thanks to that flower, his father remains alive, so he is very grateful to him. After that, he says goodbye, and while moving through the streets, he is quite impressed, perceiving that a weapon costs 50 silver coins. But at that moment, he is interrupted by the annoying brat, who asks what he is doing at his father's shop. Alan perceives that he is accompanied by the other son of the village chief, so to avoid trouble, he responds that he is not doing anything in particular and says goodbye. However, this idiot charges at him, saying that if he wants to leave, he will have to serve him. So Alan already draws his sword, prepared for combat. However, the big-headed boy responds that he is a coward for drawing that. But Alan tells him to go look for something to defend himself, and he goes running after something while ordering Poromos not to let him leave. Alan greets Poromos in the most casual manner possible, and when the annoying boy returns, he charges at him. But after a few seconds, Alan gives him a beating, thinking that his class gives him plenty of strength, though not in the same way as Krina. After that, he says goodbye while the kid is left in very bad shape. Some time later, upon returning home, he becomes very emotional because his father is already as good as new. And after that, we see how the axe boy is fighting against Alan, and he, in the calmest manner possible, slaps him on the head, scolding him because he always anticipates his attacks. Dogora expresses gratitude for the advice, but is quite frustrated because he does not understand how he fails to hit him. Dogora then tries to catch him off guard, but that serves for nothing, and during the night, we meet Alan's new sister, who is named Miura. A while later, Rodin arrives home. Teresia asks why he arrived so late, in addition to asking about Gerda, who is accompanying him from time to time. He explains that the village chief summoned them. Before, they delivered 10 boars, but now they are demanding 15, which is why the commoners will have to participate again. They tried to refuse, but this time the order comes directly from the Lord of the Lands, and if they do not reach this new quota, they will have to bring in new serfs, which means that they will have less land, and those who dedicate themselves to hunting will lose their lands, which would completely change the way the village of Krina functions. Gerda mentions that the worst part is that next year they will have to hunt 20, which means going out to hunt more than once every 10 days, in addition to obtaining more prey. Teresia obviously becomes worried, but the Lord of the Lands does not care about the opinion of some serfs. Alan understands this, commenting that even if they hunt more, if the Lord of the Lands increases the quota within 2 years, they will likewise bring in more serfs. Gerda asks him to let the adults speak, but Rodin interrupts, asking his son if they should not let the commoners participate. Alan confirms this to them, explaining that they need to see how to make them useful. Furthermore, he reminds them that the God of creation gave him wisdom, so he asks that they allow him to take care of this. After that, Alan alongside Gerda and Rodin gathers with the rest of the men. They become very excited to see that Rodin has finally returned to join the group, and they perceive that now the little brat is also going to accompany them. Rodin makes it clear that indeed his son is going to accompany them, and that this time they are going to use his strategy, but he will not participate directly in the battle. Alan laments because he wanted to fight, but his father is quite stubborn. Even so, he is there to train the novices, because he does not want anyone to get hurt again as happened with his father. At that moment, the one responsible for his father's accident approaches to beg for forgiveness, in addition to asking that they please do not blame him in case anything goes wrong. However, Rodin asks him to calm down and just worry about his role. Then the gates open and everyone begins to march. Meanwhile, Alan thinks that it is his 7th year as a serf, and it is the first time that he sets foot outside the village. At that, he perceives a huge mountain, and imagines that those must be the White Dragon Mountain, from where the boars descend every autumn in search of food, and according to legends, a mythical white dragon lives at the top of that mountain. However, since Alan stands still observing, the others begin to mock him, asking if he became afraid. Some time later, upon arriving at the camping area, the boys begin the training. Then the serfs attract the attention of the boars to finish them off, and they act perfectly. Some attract the attention, and then the tanks receive an impact. And finally, they attack the weak points applying Alan's strategy, in which the commoners deliver a blow to be able to gain a little experience and level up. And everything works out perfectly. However, Alan complains, because since he stood still and did nothing, he did not obtain any experience, so he feels that that was a victory with a taste of defeat. After that, while looking for water at the well, he asks one of the companions to please ask his father to allow him to use a spear in the next combat. However, he responds that not even if he were crazy would he do that, because definitely Rodden would finish him off just for demanding a thing like that. Alan laments. Then another guy mentions that he would also like to go hunting. If the companion responds that then he should drop the butcher knife and go participate in the fights. But he refuses because his wife is pregnant and needs to stay in a place that is safe. Alan listens to the butcher part, and since he is precisely in need of one, asks for him to accompany him. Upon arriving at his house, the guy becomes very impressed, seeing the large quantity of those birds. Alan makes it clear that they are too many to cut alone, so he is needing help, and if he takes charge of tearing them apart, he will be able to give him 2 bags of meat for each bird. An excited man goes to inspect them, while Alan thinks that this is much more profitable, because the city butchers are very expensive. Furthermore, this way he would also not think of making so many trips, which would save a lot of time that he cannot waste because he needs 50 gold coins to remove his family from serfdom. After that, the boys go out to hunt again. But this time there are new commoners, since they need to keep increasing little by little to finally have enough for 2 groups, which should double the amount of boars they could hunt. But Alan wonders why the lord of those lands is so obsessed with meat, since he does not have the impression that that territory is suffering from a food shortage. But at that moment, another boar descends from the mountain, and they return to apply the same technique as before, managing to make the commoners level up again. They become very excited, in the same manner that Alan does upon seeing his magical book, because his plan worked out perfectly, revealing that shortly before the fight he summoned Denka in a determined place. After all, he can perform summonings within a radius of 50 meters, and since poor Denka ended up crushed, that was more than enough for Alan to count as a participant in the fight. And now he managed to rise to level 3, and even though lamenting the loss of Denka, it was a necessary sacrifice. Then 3 months pass, and since in that village they also celebrate a new year, Alan was invited for the first time to the residence of the village chief. He is already returning along with Krina, who was excited by all the sweets that were in that place, in addition to the rewards they received. Some time later, they gather with their families, where all together they celebrate with a large banquet of meat. While they fill their stomachs, Gerda asks the boys if the village chief said anything about them. Alan makes it clear that he is very grateful, and the way things are going, there should be no problem to fulfill the quota of 20 boars that year, and all thanks to Alan's strategy and his plan to train the novices. At that, Gerda perceives that Alan won a small bottle of liquor, which leaves Loden and Gerda very excited, and he does not intend to waste this opportunity, so he plays dumb, and simply asks his little brother if he wants to continue training with the spear. The boy becomes very excited while we see Gerda and Loden remain perplexed. Alan continues developing his strategy by asking what is happening, and his father comments that since the village chief gave him that small bottle, he could present them with it. Alan makes it clear that he is not going to do that because that bottle is his, but they begin to complain because he is not yet of age to drink. Alan then joins the banter, responding that he will only let them keep it if they win a competition. Loden gets excited and accepts. However, Alan asks what they are going to give him as a prize, because he also needs to gain something. His father asks what he wants, and he goes straight to the point, commenting that they need to allow him to use a spear in all the boar hunts that year. They understand that they fell completely into his trap, but in the end, they end up accepting. If they win, they will keep the liquor, but if Alan wins, he will be able to fight in the hunts. They ask what kind of competition he has in mind, and he very confidently responds that it is going to be arm wrestling. The two become very excited, thinking that it is going to be a piece of cake. They quickly prepare themselves, just as Alan does, who also makes his preparations using all the blessings that increase his strength. In the beginning, he gives the advantage to Gerda, but afterward, he humiliates him, though he feels that it was a bit close. So he imagines that Gerda's attack must be between 150 and 200. And after a short rest suggested by Loden, the turn of the two arrives, where Alan is surprised to see that his father's hands are quite calloused, proof of how much he has already worked every day for them. His father feels proud, since it is hard for him to believe that his son is already big enough to want to compete with him, while Alan thinks about giving his best to manage to win that battle. However, in the end, Loden comes out as the victor, which makes Alan understand that his father must have at least 300 attack. He accepts the defeat and delivers the bottle of liquor, and the two already begin to get drunk. Alan imagines that Jirda's strength must be in the D ranking, while that of his father must hover around the C ranking. At that, Lawton makes it clear to Alan that he is not weak. Simply his father is very strong and does not intend to let him hunt boars until he has what is necessary to defeat him. Alan excitedly thinks that he will have his revenge since he has an opportunity to achieve this, and that is to raise the level of his summonings to level 4 before autumn. However, at that moment, Jirda begins to cause a bit of trouble, and Matilda takes charge of teaching him a lesson, leaving Alan quite surprised, who thinks that probably Matilda must also be in the C ranking. Time passes, and Alan at 7 years old manages to raise the summoning level, which allows him to summon E ranking creatures. But before managing that, first he needs to fuse them to see which ones he can unlock. However, since now he has plenty of mana, he can perform experiments without any problem. He perceives that he also unlocked storage, but notices that it does not possess a determined limit. So first he places a piece of wood inside there. After taking it out, he tries with a stone. Upon putting his hand in to remove it, he perceives that he can mentally see what exists inside the storage. Quickly he begins to experiment by placing all types of things inside there, becoming quite surprised upon perceiving that apparently there is no limit, something that worries him considerably. And now, while he is gathered with his family, he thinks that an important part of games is how many objects the player can carry, and he cannot understand why they gave him a god-level storage skill precisely at that moment, since a carpet, a boat, or a key normally appear only when they are necessary. So he feels that there must exist some reason for that storage, but for now, it is better to go experiment with his new summonings. He tries to summon an E-ranking insect, but quickly perceives that now he needs E-ranking magic stones to manage to perform these summonings. So without wasting time, he goes hidden behind his savings, where he possesses some magic stones. Upon trying again, he perceives that it does not work. At that moment, he remembers the storage and places the magic stone inside there. Upon trying another time, the summoning works, managing to summon a huge butterfly. However, at that instant, his mother appears, and he becomes desperate, asking for the butterfly to hide. His mother asks what is happening, and he invents a lame excuse, and when she leaves, he begins to dance all excited, and we see how he is dying of fear of his own summoning. It is a massive saber-toothed tiger. Alan stores it inside his magical book, and afterwards he attempts to create a bird, fusing the beast card with the insect card, and after using the magic stone he manages to create a bird, but this makes him realize that he is going to need a lot of magic stones. The good side is that these summons increase his statistics by a great amount. During the night he asks his father about the horned rabbits, and he reveals that perhaps they will not see them much again, because a few years ago they built a ditch around the entire village. Alan laments, wondering to himself how he is going to obtain the magic stones. The next day we see the boys training, and they are giving Alan a beating. On the other hand, Alan asks Paromos what he knows about magic stones, and he reveals that they are almost always used to enhance magic tools. And in the royal capital, there are several different types. He comments that the D rank and C rank stones can serve the people of the capital, but the E rank ones are basically garbage, and normally they are left lying around on the ground. He takes the opportunity to pick up one that was precisely fallen right there. Alan understands that he will practically have to search through the entire village. Sometime later, already with several stones collected, he manages to obtain all the E-rank summons and feels that the moment has arrived to discover their skills. However, suddenly, a wild boar emerges out of nowhere, and the summons activate on their own to protect Alan. Papillon distracts the wild boar, while Bansi heals Alan's wounds, and then Udemy leaps to the rescue, sinking its teeth and defeating the wild boar. However, another one suddenly appears, but Alan appears to protect it, and ends up defeating the wild boar. Suddenly we realize that everything seemed to have been a hallucination. Alan feels that during all those 7 years, he had been thinking about how exactly one should play as a summoner. After all, in any game he could simply read a guide, but that is not an option in that world, and it needs to be himself who will discover how to bring out all the potential of a summoner. At that moment he summons the E-rank creatures and understands that the beast-type summons serve to attack. The insect-type ones serve for debuffs. The bird-type ones serve to collect and transmit information. The stone-type ones serve to defend. And finally the plant-type ones serve to heal. He possesses every type of summon, and each one fulfills its role as if it were an organized group, but in a single person. Furthermore, he also understands why they gave him the storage skill, since otherwise he would not be able to carry an absurd amount of magic stones. Alan knows that he now possesses an army at his disposal, capable of overcoming any situation and crushing any enemy, transforming the summoner into a being far more superior and powerful than even a demon king. After that, Alan, Gerda, and his father are called to the chief's house, who informs them that the Lord of the Lands has decided to visit the town within a month, with the excuse that he wants to see personally how they conduct the hunts. They do not think this is a good idea, because it is already horrible that they have increased the monthly quota. But now it seems that they want them to offer a spectacle. However, Rodden's true question is the reason why they have invited Alan as well. The village chief explains that they need someone to serve as the tour guide for the Lord of the Lands, and considering that Paromos is not very good at dealing with people, the best option is Alan. After all, it was he who created the ideas of the hunts that they conducted. With the cards on the table, Alan begins to understand why the chief had been being so kind lately. But he is not so foolish as to accept an extra job like that, so he plans to just ignore it. However, he realizes that living with the noble is the perfect opportunity to leave that village once and for all, because if he continues there it will take him 10 years working to achieve the status of a commoner. But if he manages to convince the Lord of the Lands that he deserves it, he could obtain the status much faster and his life would change from one second to the other. So without thinking much, he accepts the job. Thus several weeks pass, until finally the famous Baron Granville arrives at the village along with his right hand and his daughter Cecil. Quickly they gather at the village chief's house, where the Baron takes charge of making that little speech, thanking them for the work they did in the village of Krina, mentioning that 15 years have already passed since the decree of land reclamation, and in all this time there was no success greater than that one. He takes the opportunity to apologize for having imposed such a heavy workload. However, he explains that he had no choice because it was an order from the king. Everyone is left unable to believe the news, but the Baron, when he tastes the food, falls in love, asking where that dish came from. The village chief does not know what to answer, but at that moment Alan takes the opportunity to put his plan into practice, explaining that the meat is from the monster called Albahiron, which they hunted the previous day, because they must only serve fresh meat to someone like him. And furthermore, it is a mixture of meats and fine herbs. The Baron, upon hearing his very polite way of speaking, asks the village chief if by any chance he is his son, but he clarifies that he is Rodden's son. Seufert remembers him, and the Baron asks if Rodden is a member of the cavalry, but they explain that in reality he is a serf. At that moment, Cecil considers it an insult that they allowed a serf to enter the room. However, her father interrupts her and corrects her, making it clear that serfs are also very important, and she has no right to treat them as if they were animals. The girl apologizes, but that does not stop her from continuing to glare at Alan. The Baron asks Alan to prepare himself, because he must explain in the smallest details how they will conduct the hunt of the wild boars. Since hunting 20 wild boars is a demanding task, Seufert agrees, making it clear that if they cannot manage to do it, his knights will also help in the hunt. Alan wonders to himself if they really do not trust the serfs, and makes it clear that there is nothing to worry about, because hunting 20 wild boars will not be a difficult task, and the performance they will have the next day should be enough to convince them. The girl and the village chief are quite impressed upon hearing him. The next day he takes charge of leading them to the heart of the forest, so that they can see true work. At first they do not seem very impressed, until the hunters spring into action. They arrive at the battlefield with their new armor made entirely from the skin of wild boars. However, they are not the first to act. In reality, that work is left in the hands of the vanguard, which enters the forest at great speed. After all, their function is to draw the attention of the wild boars in the region. Normally this first part takes a lot of time, but thanks to all the improvements they implemented, not even 5 minutes passed until the first wild boar arrived at the location. It is already received by the main group, and they corner it with massive shields. After that there is no escape for the wild boar, as Rodden gives the order for the attack teams to advance, first with the conventional spears, and afterward with the long spears, used by the less experienced members so that they gain confidence. During this entire process Alan keeps explaining each one of the steps, just like the intentions behind them. The objective is for everyone to do their part without getting hurt, prioritizing the well-being of the warriors. And at the end Rodden takes charge of delivering the fatal blow, finishing in a few minutes a process that before took hours. Automatically everyone falls silent, and Seufert mentions that despite not being knights, Those men definitely deserve to be called warriors. However, his smile disappears when two massive wild boars arrive at the location. They enter into a panic, and Seufert orders his men to stand prepared to attack. However, Alan asks him to stop, and with all the calmness in the world makes it clear that they only need to watch. In a matter of seconds, the men divide themselves into groups and execute the same process despite the risk being double. Alan can understand Seufert's fear, since until a short time ago something like that seemed impossible, but thanks to the armor they can afford the luxury of risking a little more. And thus in half an afternoon they manage to defeat 3 wild boars, which according to the Baron's calculations, means that there are 17 left to complete the quota for that year. However, Alan answers that in reality only 10 are left, because before being honored with their presence they had already defeated 7, and at that pace it would take them only a few weeks to fulfill the annual quota. Alan takes advantage of having him in the palm of his hand to make 2 requests to the Baron. In the first place, he wants permission to build new shields. In the second place, they need certain goods that are not available in the village, specifically liquor. The Baron can understand that the first request will help with production, so he grants them the permission. But he cannot understand what liquor has to do with it, thinking that they only want to get drunk. However, Alan explains that it is something much deeper, since the more they produce, the more the price of the wild boar meat will drop. So a high-quality product like alcohol will be necessary to avoid a market collapse. This without counting the fact that this will help greatly to keep the morale of the workers elevated, which practically is a situation where everyone wins. And since Seufert understands the subject, he answers the Baron that the boy has an excellent point. So the Baron understands and thinks for a bit, congratulating Alan for the excellent work as a guide. He gives his thanks, but this does not pass unnoticed by Cecil, who, when they are already prepared to depart, comments to Alan that it is better for him not to let her father's praise go to his head. He simply ignores her, hoping that it will be the last time he will ever see her. However, he is quite mistaken, because after that we see how Alan, Gerda, and Rodden are called personally by the Baron in order for them to be rewarded. He announces that they and their families are going to be promoted to the status of commoners, and Alan, very excited, leaps with joy. After all, that was exactly what he wanted. Gerda and Rodden are quite impressed, while Alan keeps thinking that now, having permission to leave the boundaries of the village, he will begin to hunt every kind of monster, especially the legendary white dragon of the Dragon Mountain. But this does not apply only to them, but also to any serf who has worked for more than 10 years in the wild boar hunt. Once again, the Baron gives his thanks, because thanks to them he will manage to fulfill the task that the king entrusted to him. And speaking of the king, the butler Mober reminds the Baron that there is still another thing left to announce. The Baron remembers and reveals that the king wishes to promote the village of Krina as an example for the entire kingdom. So he wants to know the history of how the wild boar hunt began. Alan had never wondered about this, and the question takes everyone quite by surprise, since when they look at Rodden he appears rather uncomfortable. Gerda informs the Baron that this is a delicate topic for Rodden, so it will be he who will tell the story. He reveals that everything began 13 years ago when they arrived at those lands. After months of hard work clearing space in the forest, they were attacked by a massive wild boar that destroyed the plantations and ate the potatoes. The seeds had been brought from their previous land, so returning was no longer an option. At that moment, Rodden appeared and recommended attacking with strength and eliminating the wild boar to obtain its meat. Thus they marched without knowledge and without proper weapons, and after everyone gathered together they managed to defeat the monster. The Baron, upon hearing this, answers that this is a story worthy of praise. However, Gerda reveals that the problem is that they lost a very dear friend. He has already tried to tell Rodden many times that he must not blame himself, but he simply does not listen. Alan can understand why his father never hesitates to save anyone who is in danger, and the Baron mentions that that place would not have progressed so much without him making his decisions, and in exchange for everything he did for the village he offers an additional reward, making it clear that he can ask for whatever he wants. Automatically, Alan begins to think about the possibilities and asks his father to request some alcohol. However, Rodden had other plans and asks the Baron to please hire his son to work at his estate. Alan enters into a panic because that would ruin his life. It would destroy all his plans and everything for which he worked, since working for the Baron would end his freedom. The Baron asks Sebas what he thinks of the idea, and he answers that the boy is quite intelligent. So upon seeing Sebas's opinion, the Baron makes it clear that he will not turn him into a simple servant, but into a personal valet. Cecil cannot believe it and enters into a panic, saying that she cannot allow a simple serf to stay under the same roof as her. However, Sebas reminds her that he is no longer a serf and now he is a commoner, while Alan thinks desperately that he needs to do something so that he does not accept that proposal. However, the Baron ends up accepting and Alan almost feels sick. However, upon seeing his father crying with emotion, against his own will, he thanks the Baron for accepting his father's request. And now, after that, his family and friends gather to say goodbye to him. So he takes the opportunity to have one last clash with Krina. Gerda and Rodden think that this is a great way to say goodbye, but they are quite impressed to see that Alan begins to overpower Krina. He finally manages to defeat her and Krina cannot believe it. However, Alan makes it clear that she can consider that a draw, guaranteeing that when they meet again they will fight once more. She smiles, and then the moment for the sad goodbye arrives. Everyone says very beautiful words, very moving. However, suddenly Dogora appears, who thanks to a kick from Paromos jumps the fence, and embarrassed hands over a small dagger to Alan. And right after that runs away quickly, making everyone begin to laugh. Then Alan departs along with his mother and his father. And while they follow the path, Rodden asks his son to always give his best. Some time later, upon arriving at the exit of the village, his mother asks that he return home in case things get too difficult, while his father makes it clear that he must make him feel proud. With that, Alan departs, and upon opening the gates of the village he prepares himself for his new adventure, hoping that his family stays well. After that, he arrives at an estate of the Granville family, located in the center of the capital. Alan is quite impressed. But it does not take long for the difficult times to begin, because Cecil uses him as if he were a footstool to reach the fruits, and when she tastes the fruit she finds it horrible. Alan comments that normally fruits from very high trees tend to be sour, and Cecil gets quite irritated upon discovering that he already knew about this, but Alan plays dumb. She then orders him to go to the city to fetch a fruit for her to cleanse her palate. Alan accepts the order, but at that moment a shadow covers everything completely, and looking up at the sky he is marveled, observing the massive magic ship, while Cecil warns him that when he finishes admiring it, he must fetch her fruit right away. Some time later, upon waking up, he feels very good and goes to smell his plants, which reduce the cooldown time of his mana from 6 hours to 5. But at that instant his stomach growls, and he goes to look for some breakfast, where the head of the servants named Rickle gives him a good morning, and asks how things are going with Cecil. Alan answers that they are so-so. So Rickle answers with pity that little by little things will improve. He reveals that if Alan were just an ordinary hall boy, they would not demand so much from him. Alan, curious, asks what the difference is between a hall boy and a personal valet, and Rickle explains it to him. Among the higher-ranking servants are the butler, the housekeeper, the valet, the lady's maid, and the head chef. On the other hand, the lower-ranking ones include the coachman, the cook, the gardener, the personal servant, and the maid. All those officially appointed are considered part of the family, but the hall boys only help out from time to time, and are not considered family members. Alan is incredulous, asking if the servants really are considered part of the family. Rickle confirms this, and Alan understands why his father was so moved when they said that he would be a personal valet, so he feels that he needs to be grateful for that. Sometime later, while the Baron and his family are eating, Alan notices that their meals are quite simple, which makes him wonder if the Baron might be one of those stingy men. The lady of the house comments to Alan that he has learned a lot of etiquette, and he answers elegantly that everything is due to the teachings of his superiors. She is fascinated by his response, and tells her husband that Alan possesses an excellent education, and it is not what one expects from a servant. The Baron answers that indeed he is very polite, even more so considering that he does not possess a talent. Cecil hears that he has no talent, and does not miss the chance to taunt him, rubbing it in his face that she is a mage and her older brother, Mihai, is a swordsman. Alan thinks that this is not bad at all, because it is a 2-star class. However, at that moment the Baron corrects his daughter, reminding her of what he has already told her several times, not to keep boasting about her own talents. Thomas begins to cry because he does not possess any talents, but his father cheers him up, saying that he will go to the Academy of Nobles in the royal capital. However, Thomas complains because he wanted to study at the same academy as his brother Mihai, but his father explains that this is not possible because he does not possess a talent. So just like himself, he must attend the Academy of Nobles, and it is also no reason to complain because it was in that place where he met his mother and managed to form that beautiful family. Thomas accepts while Cecil apologizes for not having taken into consideration her brother's feeling, but she continues to glare at Alan. Some time later, Alan takes advantage of his free afternoon to get to know the market. And while walking through the streets he finds the Adventurers Guild, and without thinking twice he runs over there. He asks the receptionist what he needs to do to become an adventurer, and she asks his age. Alan answers that he is 8 years old, and the receptionist apologizes, but explains that he needs to be 12 years old to register as an adventurer. Alan is disappointed, because he is acting as a personal valet only out of respect for his father, but he does not intend to give up on monster hunting. So he runs to the bulletin board to see the missions and gather information. However, while he is observing, an adventurer warns him that that place is not a park. Alan apologizes and says that he is already leaving, but before that he asks why those rewards do not have a specific location. The blue-haired adventurer answers that this is because they appear everywhere, but realizes that he is passing on too much information and tells Alan to leave. Alan tells him to relax and asks how they define the ranks of the monsters, but the adventurer insists for him to go home. And Alan in a very innocent manner answers that he will leave when he answers. Without much choice, the adventurer explains, saying that the ranks of the monsters increase the further away they are from the city, which means that the higher rank monsters live closer to the White Dragon Mountain. Alan gets quite excited, because the adventurer fell right into his trap, and he notices that on the bulletin board there is a murder, a B-rank monster. So he asks the adventurer why nobody has hunted that monster, even though it has a huge reward and even shows its location. But the blue-haired guy answers that this is because that monster is quite strong, and its speed makes it even more deadly. So the best thing is to let the cavalry take care of it. Alan smiles because the adventurer is telling him everything. And then he asks about the announcement for the White Dragon, which apparently has been on that board for a long time. The adventurer asks if he should not be going home already, and Alan answers that this is the last question before he leaves. The adventurer falls into the trap once again, answering that this happens because that monster is far too powerful. And furthermore, there are massive deposits of mithril inside the White Dragon Mountain, and many people desire to mine there. For this reason, the reward only increased over the decades, and currently it is at 1,000 gold coins. Alan understands that if the reward for hunting the dragon is 1,000 gold coins, then the mithril must be worth even more than that. But at that moment the group of the adventurer arrives, who is named Raven, and the white-haired girl asks who that little boy is. Alan introduces himself and says that he was learning a lot about monsters thanks to that good gentleman. However, Raven tells him to beat it once and for all. Alan leaves satisfied, and the next day he goes out very early to make the most of his day off. To leave the city he shows the Granville emblem, which allows him to pass through peacefully. Sometime later, upon arriving at the forest, he summons his bird, which is quite intelligent. He thinks that on the way there he did not encounter any monsters, so the encounter rate is horrible. Even so, he does not intend to give up. So he summons 5 giant birds and orders them to look for monsters. They depart immediately. Then he summons Tama to serve as a bodyguard, even though he is not as intelligent as his bird hawk. At that moment, one of the birds informs that it found a monster, and quickly they head to its location. Alan is quite impressed to discover that it is a group of goblins, and they detect him quickly. But Alan acts fast, protecting himself with a group of Tamas and summoning others to surround the goblins. He feels that the battle is going to be very easy, but the goblins offer a lot of resistance, so he uses his moth to spread its sleeping powder. As soon as all the goblins fall asleep, the saber-toothed tigers begin to devour them. Alan gets quite excited, because with that hunt, he obtained a lot of experience. Even though the goblins give less experience than the wild boars, they fall much faster, so it ends up being much more advantageous. Finally, he finishes collecting the magic stones from the goblins, and asks his group of birds to search for more goblins within a radius of 3 kilometers. Then he spends the rest of the day hunting every kind of monster without stopping. At nightfall we find out that he managed to hunt 80 goblins and 5 horned rabbits, which yields him a total of 16,050 experience, allowing him to go up 2 levels. He gets quite excited because it was the best day off of his life, and he managed to gather a lot of valuable data. He also learned about the D-rank magic stones, which cannot be used to summon E-rank creatures, and obviously the opposite does not work either. The day was quite productive, but the night is still only beginning, and he wants to continue with the hunt. However, when he orders the hawks to look for more goblins, they stay without moving. Alan asks what is happening, and they apparently demonstrate that they are afraid or simply cannot see at night. Even so, he laments, because he was counting on the hawks to help him return to the village, which means that he is lost in the forest. But fortunately, we find out that miraculously he found a way back. And now 1 month after the hunt, he buys 3 iron balls, which he intends to use to throw and cause real damage to the monsters. In this short time that passed, he went out to hunt 4 times, so now he is already at level 12 farming experience, while at the same time trying to get better equipment. When he arrives at the Granville mansion, he is startled by Sebas, who warns that the time has come to talk. After that, he meets with the Baron, who makes it clear that he is an excellent worker, and he only heard good things about his performance, both from Sebas and from Rickle. However, he needs to know what Alan has been doing on his days off, because he always leaves very early and returns far too late. 17F. Even though he is naturally free to spend his days off however he likes, he needs to be aware of his activities. Alan understands that it is normal for him to be worried, so he decides to be as honest as possible, revealing that he has been hunting monsters in the outskirts of the city. After all, he is the son of Rodin, a wild boar hunter. Hunting runs through his veins, but soon he realizes that he said that on impulse, even though it had seemed right to say that. The Baron understands, after all he is the son of a legend. And Sebas in his turn asks what he has been doing with the horned rabbits that he has been hunting. Alan realizes that they believe that he is hunting E-rank monsters. However, Sebas comments that if he is selling the meat to a butcher for money, he must stop immediately because that could cause a scandal. Alan apologizes, even though in reality he just discards that meat. Even so, Sebas continues and reveals that the Granville mansion will buy all the horned rabbit meat that he can manage to get, paying 1 silver coin per package. Alan gets quite excited, because that means that he can hunt freely and still earn money. So without hesitating, he gives his thanks to both. Thus 6 months pass. While he is in the forest looking at his statistics, the group of birds appears alarmed and gathers with him. Alan quickly follows them, realizing that on that occasion his creatures are taking him very far away. But when he arrives at the location, he finds the adventurers from before, who are surrounded by a group of goblins, and to make the situation worse, Raven is gravely injured. Even so, Alan enters the battle, and with one of his iron balls, he rips off the hand of one of the goblins. He warns that he came to help and asks the girl to take care of the one-armed goblin while he goes after the others. This time he needs to fight without his summons, since it is best not to reveal them. And since he is already at level 12, and the blessings of his creatures increase his attributes, currently he possesses 300 agility, enough to defeat D-rank monsters without needing to use summons. After defeating the goblins, he realizes that Raven is very injured and Mills, the healer of the group, has already run out of mana. He understands that Raven will not survive the trip back to the city, so he warns that he possesses healing herbs that they could try to use. The desperate girls say that they will pay any price, and Alan discreetly summons a grass of life that he managed to create utilizing Bansi's skill. Upon applying it to Raven, his wound heals completely. In this manner, he manages to wake up. Alan also heals Rita, and the girls are shocked because he utilized 2 extremely valuable items. He asks them not to worry, because that is not exactly what they are thinking. Raven, upon observing him better, remembers that he had already seen him at the guild. Alan comments that now that they are well, he can continue his path. However, Raven asks that he allow them to reward him. After all, he owes him his life. Alan just wants to go back to farming, so he makes it clear that they can pay him simply by not telling anyone about him. They guarantee that they will take care of that, and that if he needs any other help he can count on them. Taking advantage of the moment, Alan comments that he is collecting E-rank stones, and if they can help him with that it would be fantastic. Upon seeing this, the adventurers ask if that is really all that he wants. Alan confirms that, and an excited Raven guarantees that in more or less a week, he will have his 100 E-rank stones. After that, he continues his path and remembers that his father took almost a whole month to recover completely after they used the Morso flower. But Raven healed practically instantly with his leaf of life. This makes him assume that the Morso plant recovers a certain amount of life based on the person's maximum HP, while his leaf of life heals a fixed amount of HP. He also noticed that in this battle he obtained 160 experience, which is equivalent to 80% of what he earns when he farms alone. That is, it is possible that experience is not divided when they fight in a group. But the most important detail that he needs to resolve now is with his birds. So upon summoning it, he asks why it ignored his orders, when he had already made it clear that it should only look for monsters within the marked kilometers. This time Hawk appears embarrassed, but Alan asks if it was worried about the adventurers and wanted to save them. The bird confirms it, which leaves Alan impressed to discover that his summon is conscious. Hawk followed its own feelings and went to look for him to save the adventurers, which makes him think that the god of creation gave him incredible summons. After thinking for a bit, he apologizes to Hawk and makes it clear that he did not want to make it feel bad, and that from now on he will be more careful with the orders that he gives in the future. Alan, in addition to this, says that he is very happy to have it on his team. And after that we see once again Sissel using Alan as a footstool, while she looks for jam because she wants to make cookies for her brother Mihai, who will return home soon. Some time passes, and now Alan is 8 years old. December is approaching, and he is together with the Granville family, where he notices that they can no longer afford the luxury of eating wild boar meat like before, even though in the village of Krina they are hunting a lot. Unfortunately, they need to send everything directly to the capital. The Baron's son complains about the food, but his father very seriously asks him not to complain, and Alan is quite surprised to see how rigid he is, finding it impressive that the son of a noble family eats less meat than a simple servant. The lady of the house comments that unfortunately the banquet of that year will have to be quite simple, since there is not much that can be done. But at that moment Thomas asks Alan if by any chance he could manage to hunt a white stag. But Cecil scolds him, saying that Alan is her servant, and he should ask permission from her first. Even so, he accepts with pleasure. After all, the white stag is a C-rank monster, just like the wild boar, so it will be very useful to test his power. And now, some time later, we see that he is in the forest, and Hawk informs him that it found a stag, so he wastes no time and goes after it. And upon arriving at the location, he is quite impressed, realizing that it is truly massive and also carnivorous, since it is devouring goblins. But no matter how big it is, it does not represent any problem for Alan, who begins to taunt it with his little frogs, making the stag get very angry, falling into one of his traps, which means that it fell right into his hands. And after that, upon arriving at the mansion, the guards prepare to fight upon seeing the monster. But Alan appears underneath the stag, asking them to call Master Thomas, since it was he who asked for the white stag. The family gathers at the entrance and Thomas gets quite enthusiastic, advising his mother that now finally they will be able to have the winter banquet. But the Baron asks Sebas how that boy without possessing a gift managed to bring a white stag of that size, so he asks that Sebas investigate this. At night, Sebas advises Alan that he will be assigned to a new position, which consists basically of two things: tracking monsters to obtain food and helping people affected by them. Alan finds that a unique opportunity, because he will be able to hunt peacefully. But when Sebas advises that he will receive double the payment, Alan understands that they are going to ruin his business, because now they would no longer buy the meat directly from him, since he would start to work officially to hunt this meat. However, a promotion is a promotion and obviously it is worth it. But the detail is that Sebas comments that he will only hunt once a week, and Alan already does not like the idea so much. Sebas notices this and tells him that if he does not like the offer, he can simply refuse it. But since the promotion is important, Alan accepts. It is also important to highlight that he will continue being Cecil's personal valet. After a long time, now everyone is gathered to receive Cecil's older brother. When the ship lands, she immediately runs to hug him and scolds him for having taken so long to arrive, taking the opportunity to introduce her personal valet, Alan. Now she displays him all proud, whereas before she despised him totally. Alan introduces himself and Cecil tells her brother that her servant is also part of the household work. Mihai looks him up and down, commenting that he must have talent to enter the household work at only 8 years old. But Alan, being extremely polite, answers that everything is due to the kindness of Lady Cecil, while he thinks that her older brother does not look like her at all, at least in personality. Mihai gives a brooch to Cecil, and she emotionally takes him to deliver the cookies that she made for him. Meanwhile, Alan wonders how his family is doing. After that, he hunts a giant chicken, and upon returning to the city, the chief and Rickle receive him delighted, mentioning that at that moment the young master Mihai is facing the captain of the order. Upon arriving at the location, Alan observes how Mihai possesses great speed, and furthermore it is the first time that he sees the captain use his sword. Finally, the captain ends the duel, and congratulates Mihai because he improved a great deal. Cecil notices that Alan finally returned, and everyone is impressed to see that the hunt was very good. Upon seeing Mihai, he asks if he could grant a duel. Alan answers asking if he really can do that. But the Baron gives his consent. The captain lends his sword, and Alan is surprised to see that it is a mithril sword. At that moment he sees his statistics, remembering that his last duel was against Krina, but since he started hunting once a week, he has been doing very well, and went from level 13 to level 20. So he does not see himself losing in that duel. Seufert starts the battle, and Alan advances rapidly against Mihai. But when they clash their swords, he notices that Mihai does not even flinch, and counterattacks very fast. Alan is perplexed upon feeling his powerful attacks. Even so, he believes himself to be faster, or at least he thought so, because Mihai overcomes him with great ease. His mother upon watching the battle gets quite worried, but Seufert comments that she must not worry, because her son spent an entire year in the Academy City, and cannot lose to someone who has never been there. Then suddenly Mihai disarms him, saying that now he can understand why he is a servant even being so young. Alan accepts his defeat. It was a crushing defeat, and at that moment his siblings arrive commenting that Mihai is someone impressive. Mihai shares that he ventured into a dungeon last summer, and that in the academy if the students do not enter the dungeon they end up being expelled. Alan gets quite excited upon hearing his stories, and thinks that Mihai is someone very incredible, understanding that he is in normal mode, so going to dungeons and having top-tier training helps him evolve much faster than himself, who unfortunately is in hell mode. Cecil asks her brother when they will see him again, and he answers that it will only be next summer. She gets sad, but an excited Alan asks if they could fight again at that time. Mihai accepts quite delighted, and asks that he continue taking care of his sister. Alan answers that he will take care of everything, but right after that realizes that he is acting more and more like a servant, and if he continues that way he will end up serving Cecil forever, and he needs desperately to find a way to abandon this job without disappointing his father. A few days later, Mihai returns to the Academy City, the same one to which Krina, Dogora, and Cecil will go someday. Sometime later Baron Granvelle meets with Viscount Carnal. Alan serves the dish to him, and upon tasting the food Carnal falls in love, asking if that is the famous wild boar meat. The Baron answers yes, and asks Alan if he is correct, and Alan confirms it. However, Alan knows perfectly well that that is not wild boar meat, but rather rabbit meat, and the Baron also knows that. Carnal comments that now he understands why they wanted to keep all the meat just for themselves, but the Baron answers that it is nothing like that. However, Alan notices that he is green with rage, and remembers that the wild boar quota increased because that idiot told everything to the king. Alan also remembers that Rickle had told him to take great care with Viscount Carnal, and with the Baron when they were together, because the two are just like cat and dog. And since Carnal possesses a rank superior to the Barons, sometimes they end up having differences. Thanks to Rickle we discover that the mithril is located in a mountain range of the White Dragon, and even though two sides exist, currently the dragon is on the side of the Granvelle family. For this reason they cannot extract it, and this limits the family economically. As the White Dragon is quite capricious, it changes places every 100 years, which means that the Carnal family was quite poor a century ago. Alan feels that it is a rather complicated problem, because perhaps the Granvelle family was mean to the Carnal family at that time. At that moment, the Baron asks Carnal what the reason for his visit is, and he answers that the food was so good that he ended up forgetting, commenting that he went there to announce the result of the evaluation of his daughter's ritual, mentioning that luck is on his side because she does not possess any gift. Meanwhile, on the Granvelle side, 2 of the 3 children received one. The Baron gets quite irritated, and reminds Carnal that his oldest son also possesses one, and that they just need to fulfill their duty as nobles. Carnal just laughs, while Alan wonders to himself if for the nobility possessing a gift is something sad, because for the servants and commoners, receiving a gift is a reason for joy. But it seems that for the nobles this is a nightmare. Thus time passes, and now Alan is 9 years old. He is at the Adventurers Guild, where he comments to the adventurers from before that he wants to go out to hunt a bit further from the city, and would like to know the particularities of C-rank monsters. Currently he has already hunted about 10,000 goblins, and there are not many left around those places, so he needs to go to other areas. Raven comments that C-rank monsters are very dangerous, but Alan answers that he does not need to worry, and it is precisely for that reason that he is asking for information. Rita mentions that if that is what he wants, then they need to go to a certain place. After that, Alan is quite anxious to enter the armory, and since Rita likes to play around, she asks him to try that on. So Alan buys a new equipment and a cloak. Now, while running through the forest excited, he thinks that the feeling of improving equipment little by little is incredible. Furthermore, his blessings have also doubled. Hawk informs him of the location of a monster, and upon arriving at the place he finds a sleeping orc. He wastes no time and attacks it with a pack of tamas. The detail is that the orc fights very well and finishes them off, but Alan summons more until he finally defeats it, obtaining 100 experience points, and most importantly, he obtains a C rank stone. The most exciting thing is that now he can defeat it without needing to set up traps, but he feels that he still has a long way to go to reach the same level as Mihai. At this, Hawk warns him about another one, and upon reaching the location he finds a C rank armored ant. He tries to use the same strategy as the orc, but it does not work, so he quickly uses his moth, managing to put it to sleep. He tries to attack it in a soft part, but the ant is armored from all sides, and not even Alan with his 438 strength can pierce it. The ant tries to devour him, which makes a desperate Alan stab it without stopping, until he finally manages to defeat it. The problem is that he still cannot extract its magic stone, because even dead it continues to be as hard as rock, and even though it gave double the experience that the orc gave, it is not worth it to fight them. His dagger is about to break and physical attacks do nothing. While observing his statistics, he wonders if he should burn it, but seeing that his intelligence is very high, he feels that it is already time to learn magic. Now he is accompanied by Cecil, who managed to get an audience with the family mage, and Alan without thinking twice asks if he can learn magic. But Cecil answers that if he does not have a gift he cannot do that. However, the bald man answers that they could try, and asks for him to place his hands on the crystal. If it lights up it means that he can use magic. Alan tries, but the crystal does not light up, and the bald man recommends that he forget about magic because that is definitely not for him. Alan then wonders what so much intelligence is for, and realizes that he will have to work himself to death his whole life because of his class. Sometime later, while the family is eating peacefully, Rickle appears suddenly, warning that a giant creature is heading toward the city, and that it should arrive in approximately 2 hours. Everyone is on alert, and the Baron immediately asks Sebas about Seufert, but he answers that unfortunately Seufert is not in the city, since he went out to exterminate monsters and will only return in 2 days. With this in mind, the Baron orders that they ask for help from the Adventurers Guild, because they need to protect the city, and upon seeing this, Alan offers to help. The Baron accepts, however Cecil reminds him that he is her personal valet, and cannot leave without her consent. But Alan answers that even being her servant, he also protects the household, and without losing time goes to the city, since this creature is a B-rank monster, and none of the adventurers present will be able to do anything against it. And to everyone's sorrow currently he is without magic, because he spent everything in the morning increasing his skills. On the other hand, the guards and adventurers evacuate all the people. Unfortunately, the family of a citizen is in the wagon, which is being attacked by this creature. Alan wastes no time and advances against it, and with his iron balls explodes one of its eyes, managing to make it let go of the wagon. He begins to draw the attention of the monster. The gate guard shouts for Alan to run for his life. However, he simply ignores them and continues to draw the attention of the monster, to afterwards warn that he is going to lead it to the White Dragon Mountain. But the guards are incredulous, saying that he will only manage to die, and that this is a completely foolish decision. Alan begins to run, heading to the White Dragon Mountains, and he enters into a panic upon realizing that he has not recovered absolutely any of his mana, and the giant troll approaches him very fast, and Alan manages to dodge it by a hair. However, he notices how the monster is smiling sadistically. Alan feels that finally he recovered part of his mana, and for this reason he eliminates 2 cards to stack more moths, which will allow him to achieve greater speed and defense is very important at this moment. He continues to draw the attention of the monster, and seeing that he reached a point where nobody else should be able to see him, quickly summons his moths, which use their powder together to put it to sleep, but unfortunately it did not work. Alan summons a few more to try to make it sleep by force, but the creature does not think of giving up, and finishes off the butterflies very fast, making the monster now much more enraged. After that, we see that Alan continues running for his life, while the foul troll gives him no rest. Alan resolves to play hide and seek, trying desperately to hide himself, until finally he seems to manage to lose it. And when he can finally breathe a little, he gets sad to discover that his moths do not work against a monster like that one. He wonders to himself how he should defeat it. He has already used a lot of magic stones, and at least he has already drawn it away from the city. So he feels that it is already time to leave. But upon putting on his cloak, he feels a gaze behind him. And looking back, he enters into a panic, while the monster returns to pursue him. Now we see that 3 days pass and finally Alan returns to the city, where the guard upon seeing him runs rapidly to him, and they take him to the Baron's mansion, where Cecil gets emotional upon seeing that he finally woke up, but scolds him, reminding him that he is her servant. Sebas asks if he can remember anything, and Alan shares that that creature pursued him for 3 days and 3 nights. After that he delivers the report to the Baron, and apologizes because he could not manage to defeat it. He only managed to draw it away. The Baron reassures him, saying that he must not worry, and Sufert mentions that protecting the city is the duty of the knights. But he drew the creature away and limited human losses, and for that reason rewarded him with 10 gold coins from the Granville family, in addition to another 10 gold coins from the family that he saved previously. Alan gets quite excited because with this money he will be able to buy a mithril sword. But we notice that Sufert is quite thoughtful. Sometime later, Alan now with his new sword manages to cut the iron ants with great ease, but their skin continues to be very hard, so he needs to cut in specific areas. He asks for 2 birds to descend, and to the one that continues in the air, he asks that it draw away a bit and return when it is called. One of the ones that descend he transforms into a card, so he performs an experiment with them. He takes some objects and places them on the ground, and takes another and stores it in a sack. He asks what is present, and if it knows which is the object that he stored, and the bird manages to guess right. Afterward he summons the one that he had stored, and asks again, and it also guesses right. But upon calling the one that had drawn away and asking it, it does not know what was stored. So he summons another one and does the same test, and it also guesses right. After some time performing experiments, he understands that his summons can synchronize their information and evolve. But this only works with new summons, because the information is not shared with the ones that already exist. Furthermore, this happens only with creatures of the same species, and since his summons have consciousness, they transmit their knowledge to the summons that come after them. And thanks to their summoner, these creatures can evolve, transcending death. Time passes, and now 1 year later, Alan finds himself facing Mihai, who recognizes that he became much stronger. In the last 6 months he defeated 2000 C rank monsters, and now he is already at level 28. But Mihai continues being superior. Alan accepts this defeat even while feeling frustrated, since he would love to go to that academy to also strengthen himself. Mihai recognizes that he became much stronger, and sometime later while they are in the dining hall, he gets impressed upon realizing that he faced a giant troll. Mihai's younger siblings ask if he would manage to defeat that monster, but he makes it very clear that he cannot defeat a B-rank monster alone. But suddenly the snack time is interrupted, when a guard informs that the white dragon has moved. This news leaves everyone quite shocked, since according to adventurers the white dragon flew toward carnal territory. The Baron gets quite enthusiastic, because finally they will be able to extract mithril after an entire century, which means that riches await his lands. Quickly he orders Sufert to see the state of the mines, but he recommends going with calm because first they need to conduct a study of the region. Mihai offers to help them to exterminate the monsters. But Sufert refuses because it is too dangerous, since in that place high-rank goblins and a giant orc village exist, so the investigation will take several months. He understands and accepts the orders. Meanwhile, Alan thinks that if the knights kill all those monsters, he will be left without experience to gain, so it is time to prepare because he does not intend to lose all that banquet. Now sometime later we see that Alan is in the forest, and since now his summon level is at level 5, he thinks about performing experiments. It took him 2 years to manage to level up, and now to reach the next level he needs 30 million experience. The Hell mode is quite difficult, but it brings a lot of benefits. Now he can store 50 cards in total, and also possesses the sharing skill. For that reason he puts it into practice, and gets quite impressed to see that he manages to share his vision with Hawk. He asks for it to fly very high, and upon doing so he is marveled. He also notices that he can give it orders, and it is as if he were possessing Hawk's body. Furthermore, he also counts on the keen eye. The special technique of his summon, the sharing skill, opens new frontiers for all of his summons. But now he wants to find out with how many summons he can manage to use sharing. Quickly he summons 3 more Hawks, and gets quite excited because now he possesses a quadruple parallel vision. Afterward he summons a Tama, and notices that he can also manage to share with other species. But upon trying with the second Tama, he gets a major headache. He understands that he will get a headache if he shares with 6 summons, so currently he is limited to 5 summons. The detail is that sharing does not level up, just like storage, so he wonders to himself if this is really his limit. At that moment he observes his intelligence, and assumes that if he increases this attribute even more, perhaps he will manage to share his skills with more summons. For this reason he uses the blessings of the cards that increase his intelligence, and upon reaching 10,000 points now he manages to share with 6 summons. Excited, he summons his D-rank creatures, and wonders if he will manage to defeat monsters just using his summons. He runs desperately trying to find some monster. He manages to find a group of ants, and orders his summons to attack together in a strategic manner. For this reason he manages to defeat all the ants in a very efficient manner. He understands that they did not defeat it with a single blow, but if each one fulfills its role, they can manage to overcome C-rank monsters. At that moment he notices his potato summon. He utilizes the little bit of mana that is left for him to activate the potato's skill called Magic Fruit, and when the fruit appears he takes it, and automatically recovers 1000 mana. This potato is quite useful, and now he also counts on Holo, which possesses a perfect night vision. The bear and the spider are his main attackers and defenders, and they also count on the enhancements from the fish. Now with this entire squad he definitely will be able to level up from a distance. The blessings of this fish increase his intelligence to 1600. That is, he manages to share his senses with 8 summons. Quickly he orders them to go out hunting everywhere, but asks them to keep drawn away from the human adventurers. They must not attack them nor counterattack. His summons understand perfectly, and with that he begins to advance quite excited, and remembers that they had mentioned that the white dragon had moved to another place, which makes him think of another utility for his sharing skill. After that we see that Krina is training with Dagora, and we see that he sends one of the summons to take a look at his family and leave a gold coin to help them. He thinks about returning every month to help them financially, in addition to being able to ease the longing for his dear family. Some time later the Baron gives his thanks for them having inspected the mines during 6 months, and as was already expected due to the absence of humans, there is a large quantity of monsters in that place. And not only in the mines, but also in the villages that they utilize to refine the mithril. The Baron orders first to recover the nearest mine, and asks how much time this will take. The detail is that Sufert answers that it will take more or less 3 years. The Baron, surprised, asks that please they do this as fast as possible, and Alan realizes that the Baron is in far too much of a hurry to fill his coffers as soon as possible. The Baron asks about the situation in the Carnal territory, and Sufert reveals that they drew the wrath of the White Dragon by continuing to mine even with it in that location, which unfortunately made the workers perish. The Baron orders that they continue watching it, and soon we see that while Alan listens to the conversation he continues gaining experience even while working at the mansion, because his summons are defeating monsters in the forest. He prepared himself a lot, and when he completes 12 years of age, he will stop working at the mansion to become an adventurer. Only 2 years are left, and he thinks about participating in the hunt to give thanks for everything that they did for him. So much time later we see Alan going toward the goblin village, and they, desperate, ring the bell warning about the invasion. Alan and his bears destroy everything, while he thinks that if he left them in that place they would continue to reproduce. When he played games he would have let them continue there, because they would become a source of experience. The detail is that now he is in that world, and the monsters feed on humans, so the best he can do is to exterminate them. Upon realizing the disadvantage, the goblins try to flee, but end up completely surrounded by the bears. However, precisely at this moment a goblin king appears, but it is nothing compared to Alan's summons, and upon defeating it Alan gets quite excited, because he obtained 200 experience points thanks to the goblin king. In total, the village gave him 48,800 points, but this is still considered quite little to manage to level up. However, his plan is to destroy all the goblin villages, in order to afterwards go and annihilate the orc villages. Thus time passes, and upon reaching March of the new year, Mihai returns to his lands. He finally graduated, but it seems that something is bothering him. Upon seeing his sister he comments with nostalgia that she is already 10 years old. But afterward he heads over to Alan and asks that he fight with everything he has. After that, in the Granvelle territory, Alan thinks that this time he will manage to defeat him. He possesses the blessings of a large quantity of spiders, which gives him an absurd speed and about 20 seconds to increase his strength. The combat begins, and Alan goes after Mihai with great speed. Mihai is quite impressed, but manages to block all of his attacks. Alan wonders to himself why despite all of his speed Mihai continues to be superior. Mihai changes from defensive to offensive, which makes Alan understand that Mihai overcomes him thanks to his mastery of the sword. For this reason Mihai achieves the victory, while Alan laments because he should not have decreased his attack to gain speed. Mihai comments that one can notice that he worked very hard, and when Alan is about to answer Mihai leaves him talking to himself to go to his father, who makes it a point to tell his son that his 3 years at the academy bore good fruits, while Sissel takes the opportunity to taunt Alan, saying that he does not even reach his brother's feet, and suggests that he ask Mihai to teach him something. Alan thinks it is a great idea, but at that moment Mihai interrupts them, advising Thomas and Sissel that he needs to talk to them. Without beating around the bush, he makes it clear that he will have to depart for 3 years to fulfill his duty as a noble. Thomas asks what that duty is, but Mihai answers that this is a secret. Sissel gets quite sad because she thought that finally they could live together. And looking at her father and her mother, she understands that there is nothing that they can do. Mihai asks that she not be sad, because he will give his best to return to them. While Alan finally understands the words of Carnal, the Baron already knew that this was going to happen, and this so-called duty of the nobles does not pass a very good feeling to him. A few days later, Mihai says goodbye to his family, and before getting into the carriage he hugs Alan, asking that please he protect Sissel very well. Alan accepts, and when he departs he wonders to himself if Mihai was trembling. Time passes, and upon reaching the month of May, Alan decides finally to attack an orc village. Now he is at level 35, and in the last 6 months he has already annihilated all the goblin villages. He initiates his attack on the orc village, and the orcs demonstrate that they will not be defeated so easily. However, Alan uses strategy and manages to enter the village, and his squad takes charge of protecting him. But at that moment the orcs begin to ring the alarm bell, and a massive army of orcs advances against Alan. He likes this quite a lot, because that will be a great banquet of experience. While the orcs keep falling one by one, his experience rises rapidly. However, suddenly Alan is hit by a ball of energy. His group manages to protect him, and observing the situation better, Alan is surprised to see 3 orc shamans. They begin to attack with their magic, while Alan gets quite furious, because it is the first time that he sees magic in that world, and precisely it is the monsters who are using that. He continues being protected, but understands that if he does not eliminate those shamans his rear guard will be annihilated rapidly. He utilizes one of his iron balls and manages to defeat one of them with great ease. They cheer up upon realizing that they are easy to defeat. He tries to attack the others, but they protect themselves. They continue attacking hidden, while one of the shamans runs desperately to advise the Orc King about the invasion. The king does not hesitate. He mobilizes the entire army. Alan realizes that the defensive phase ended, and now begins the true war. Fortunately, he possesses plenty of magic stones, sufficient to summon about 2,000 bears, and also counts on magic fruits to recover his mana. So he does not hesitate and orders an attack. The view becomes that of a massive war, and Alan thinks that little by little they are pushing the orcs back. However, at that moment the Orc King enters the battlefield, and with a single blow eliminates 2 bears. Alan continues summoning and reinforcing his beasts, but the Orc King finishes them off with great ease. Alan continues summoning, but the Orc King kills them faster than Alan manages to summon them. The bears cannot manage to get close, and worst of all is that the defense is being eliminated. The shamans use their magic to attack him, and Alan rapidly protects himself with 2 bears. Even so, he receives damage from the impact. He recovers himself with a leaf of life, while he wonders to himself how he can contain the shamans and defeat the boss. He understands that no options are left for him other than to retreat. But at that moment Siufert appears, asking if he is in trouble. Alan is quite impressed, because supposedly the knights would arrive only the next day, and Siufert upon seeing his reaction answers that he saw smoke. So he went to investigate. Siufert asks for an explanation, and a startled Alan answers that he wanted to annihilate that orc village. He realizes that Siufert saw his summons and quickly makes them disappear. However, Siufert ignores the summons and advances toward the Orc King, and orders the Vice Captain Lebrain to take care of the rest. Alan laments because he would have liked to keep the experience from the Orc King, but he is also excited to see them fight. The monster advances with everything, but Siufert easily blocks the attack with his sword. Alan is impressed, while LeBrain reveals that because of his imposing way of fighting, Seufert earned the nickname of War Demon. He continues blocking the attacks with enormous ease, while LeBrain prepares to finish off all the rest. With a single leap, he reaches the center of the battlefield and activates his extra skill. Alan, upon seeing it, is quite impressed, because it is very similar to Krina's, and upon executing it, he finishes off everyone, taking down a massive quantity of orcs and one of the shamans. Afterward, he continues, while Alan wonders to himself how he managed to lose to Krina when she is so broken like that. On the other hand, the Orc King advances against Seufert, but he dodges with a massive leap. Then with a single blow, he cuts the Orc King in half. Alan cannot believe that he has so much strength, because he finished off a B-rank monster without even using extra skills. Sometime later, at nightfall, Alan is at the camp with the knights while Seufert mentions that he already had suspicions and asks to confirm if it was not he who annihilated the goblin villages. Alan confirms it, and Seufert reveals that since he entered the service of the Granville family, the knights found corpses of monsters in the outskirts of the city, and none of them possessed magic stones inside them. They also obtained the White Stag, and he was able to fight on equal terms against Mihai. This made it much easier to connect the dots. Seufert understands that he possesses a gift and assumes it is related to the creatures that fought by his side. Alan has nothing else to say. Seufert realized everything, and he only confirms it, but he does not intend to reveal much, because if they discover his connection to the god of creation, he could get into a lot of trouble. Seufert reveals that the Baron already knows about everything, and for that reason they placed him on the mansion shift. Alan is quite impressed and realizes that this was why he had so many freedoms. Sometime later, he begins to wash Seufert's armor, who comments to Alan that if he wants him to keep quiet, then he will not tell anything to the Baron about the creatures that he saw, but in exchange he wants him to keep him informed about the progress of his monster hunt. After all, both possess the same objective. Alan accepts, but he laments because now he will no longer be able to go first and will end up losing a bit of experience to the knights. However, he wonders to himself how Seufert managed to survive a wound like that one, and why that scar does not disappear even while leveling up. 2 weeks later, we see Alan very excited, because now he manages to defeat an orc village alone, and following his well-elaborated strategy achieves the victory with great ease. Just one orc village yields him 335,000 experience points. However, a short time later, we see royal emissaries arriving at the Granville mansion. Upon gathering in the dining hall, the Baron asks the reason for the visit. They answer that they have something for him. Sebas delivers some documents to the Baron, which end up being Mihai's diary. The royal emissary reveals that in the field they are obligated to write regularly. The Baron holds the diary with fear, but the emissary informs that unfortunately Mihai passed away while fulfilling his duty as a noble. The Baron becomes indignant, answering that that was not what was agreed upon, and questions how his son can die in just 6 months. He accuses them of having placed Mihai in a dangerous place, just for being low-ranking nobles. The emissary asks if they must consider those words as an affront to the royal family. The Baron falls into silence because there is nothing that he can do. While the emissaries say goodbye, Alan remembers that Mihai was trembling, so he already knew that that was going to happen. The Baron asks everyone to leave the room and stays only with Cecil. Some time later, everyone hears Cecil shouting that her brother already knew that he was going to die, and outraged asks her father if the nobility then lives only to die because of that damn duty. Her father does not know how to answer, so she runs out. Looking at the Baron, Alan wonders if there truly is nothing that can be done, and if there is something that forces nobles to obey. Sometime later, while eating together with Rick, he tells him that the Baron's parents and older brother died young to fulfill that duty, but dying at the age of 15 is far too cruel. At that moment, the mansion falls into complete despair as they hear the news that Lady Cecil has disappeared from her room. All the servants begin searching for her desperately, and Alan immediately runs out to look for her, blaming himself because he should not have left her alone, hoping that Cecil does not do anything reckless. A long time later, we finally see Cecil, who is extremely exhausted after running so much. Alan manages to find her quickly using one of his summons, and upon finding her, she asks if he is going to take her back to the mansion. However, Alan replies that he is there to do whatever she wants, as he is, after all, her servant. She merely commands him to leave, but at that moment her stomach ends up growling, so Alan takes some bread and some fruit out of his book. Then Sissel begins to eat voraciously, and soon she begins to cry as well. While trying to pretend to be strong by saying that she is not crying, she asks Alan if her brother was strong, and he replies that of course he was, since he was never able to defeat him. Sissel is crying heavily, remembering that her brother's letter said that he was very afraid. He did not want to die and wanted to return to his family. She becomes quite shaken, telling Alan that she does not want to die, and he proposes that the two of them leave the city together and forget about their family's affairs. Sissel did not expect this, but Alan continues, saying that the best thing would be to visit various countries and cities. She replies that this is impossible, but Alan informs her that they can wait until they turn 12 years old to become adventurers. Sissel refuses, replying that she needs to go to the academy. But Alan asks if that is truly necessary, because there is always a choice, and she is free to make her own decisions. He asks her what she truly wants to do, and Sissel is quite surprised. She remembers what her brother's letter said, that despite the fear of everything he felt, he was not in that place because of his family or the people, but rather by his own decision. Observing the brooch that her brother gave her, she asks Alan to take her back to the mansion. After that, when they return, the Baron and his entire family run to embrace her. Her father makes it clear that she does not need to worry, because very soon they will begin the extraction of mithril, and if he offers the mining rights to the king, she will be freed from her duty. He will do everything possible to negotiate this by force with them, so she must not worry. Alan understands why the Baron was so desperate to begin the extractions. However, Sissel informs her father that she intends to fulfill her duty as a noble, and just like her brother, she does not intend to run away. Her family becomes quite shocked and proud. Time passes, and now we see how Alan manages to defeat an orc king with greater ease, along with its entire village. And thanks to the fact that the knights and he killed all the orcs, the Granville family managed to recover their routine. However, most of the work was definitely done by Alan. Upon returning to the mansion, he overhears the Baron talking to Suf, who breathes a sigh of relief because they will finally be able to begin the excavation of mithril very soon. And now that Carnal can no longer extract minerals, all that remains is to watch him because it is always good to remain alert. Meanwhile, Alan is climbing the mountain, while thinking that Sissel would never be able to climb that. She had previously said that she also wanted to hunt, and wanted him to take her along, but obviously the Baron would never accept that. Finally, Alan manages to find the entrance to the ant's nest. This nest will hinder the mining exploration, so now the ants are going to be his new prey. He assumes that there are at least 1,000 armored ants inside that cave, and that the queen ant, who is B rank, must also be inside. Alan still needs more information, because with the birds he cannot see from the sky what exists inside the cave, and entering the cave like that could be suicide. Therefore, the best thing is to eliminate them at the entrance first, which is why he summons a full team. Upon seeing the summons, the ants quickly begin to emerge from the cave, and Alan ends up initiating a brutal battle. After a whole month passes, we see Alan with enormous dark circles under his eyes. He wonders how so many ants keep appearing, since he usually eliminates more than 200 of them per week and has already killed around 2,000 ants. The good side is that he has already obtained a huge amount of experience, but he is completely exhausted. Furthermore, the corpses of the ants disappear every time, which makes him wonder if the queen is eating them to lay more eggs, preventing him from collecting more magic stones. He tries to change his strategy, so another whole month passes, and he continues killing ants desperately. His experience rises uncontrollably. He has already killed more than 5,000 ants in total, and they still do not stop appearing. He wonders if he will have to start hunting them full time. But suddenly the ants stop appearing. He gives thanks and his expression changes completely, because now the moment has come to search for the queen. But he is not foolish enough to enter directly, so he summons some creatures to explore the interior of the cave. Thanks to his skill, he manages to share their vision and map everything in his diary, creating a map of all the tunnels, which resemble a giant labyrinth. One of his creatures dies, but Alan continues summoning until he finds the egg room, and thus he spends the rest of the afternoon summoning to map that entire place. By nightfall, he is already quite exhausted, as if he had been playing a minigame. It is already very late, and at that pace, he will not be able to return to the mansion. But at that moment, one of the creatures finally finds the queen's room, and Alan quickly advances along with his entire army. He is quite impressed to see that the queen is enormous, but following his strategy of killing and devouring everything that appears along the way, the bears manage to clear a path. However, they are no match for the queen, who finishes all of them off quite easily. Fortunately, Alan manages to summon them faster than she can kill them. And then a large number of bears begin to bite her abdomen. And finally, the queen ant falls, yielding no less than 45,000 experience points. The bears begin to celebrate the victory, while Alan realizes that he needed only 40 of them to defeat her, whereas the orc general required 100. But he figures she might be weakened from laying so many eggs, since it has already become very late. He decides to spend the night in that place. He knows he will receive a scolding when he returns to the mansion. But first he needs to bring proof of what he did to rid himself of the scolding. And at that moment, he notices the mithril. The next day, he appears at the mansion with the queen ant, which he obtained in the White Dragon mountain range. Everyone is incredulous and approaches to examine it, while Alan thinks that they should at least disguise their excitement a little. Cecil shamelessly asks him to invent a more convincing lie, and Alan, seeing that they do not believe anything, draws his secret weapon and shows the mithril minerals he obtained in the mountain range. Everyone is surprised because mithril is not found just anywhere, and they request that someone accompany him to explain the entire situation, while Cecil cannot believe that he was actually telling the truth. Now in the office, Alan explains in detail how the cave was structured, and thanks to the information provided by him, the Baron realizes that there are 5 mithril veins, and congratulates Alan for performing an excellent job. For this discovery, Alan receives the right to 30% of the mining profit. Sebas comments that he will have to wait a little while before finding out how much that will yield in money. While Alan cannot believe that he ended up getting involved in something so massive, time passes and at long last Alan turns 12 years old. After 100 years, Granvelle can extract mithril again, and the vein that Alan found will be exploited next year. The monsters in the surroundings no longer cause concern, and he also does not need to care about money thanks to the mithril. But none of this was what he truly wanted. He was only seeking a true challenge, and not all this stability. Therefore, the moment has come to move to the next level, and he decides to talk to the Baron that night. But at that moment he is interrupted by Rickle, who is quite worried because they have received a visit from the royal emissary once again. After that, we see the emissary gathered with Carnal. The Baron asks to what he owes the honor of the visit, and the emissary informs him that the king is aware of the dispute between the Carnal family and the Granvelle family over the extraction of mithril in the mountain range. Upon delivering a document, the Baron realizes that those idiots are proposing a joint administration. They want to divide the White Dragon mountain range. That way, the profits will be split equally to avoid any tragedy. The emissary further informs him that the contract in his hands was drafted by the Vice Minister of Justice and that the Viscount of Carnal has already signed it. Even so, the Baron apologizes and says that he first needs to discuss the matter in the capital. This leaves the emissary indignant, and he asks how a mere Baron dares to consider him untrustworthy. However, he maintains his posture, and the Baron replies that he will not make such an important decision in an irresponsible manner. The angry emissary states that he will regret this, since by taking this stance he has demonstrated a desire to monopolize the mithril, and then they leave. After they depart, the Baron displays his anger, because the Granvelles waited 100 years to finally be able to make money, and now they want to force them to divide everything. He asks Sebas where Suf is, who replies that he should return in 2 days, so the Baron is left with no other choice but to wait for his return before departing for the capital. With this news, Alan feels that it will now be much more difficult to tell the Baron that he wants to resign. At that moment, he overhears Chief Rickle commenting that the proposal is quite good, and Alan recognizes that even though it is tempting, they are talking about Viscount Carnal, who would definitely betray the Baron at some point. However, if he refuses, he will end up looking like a greedy man. Precisely at that instant, a maid screams Cecil's name, and Alan, so they run desperately to her room, where he finds some bandits holding Cecil captive. He does not even think twice and charges at them, but the brutes with eye patches stop him easily. Alan realizes that the man possesses great strength, so he switches his blessings to become stronger. He charges at the man again, and upon realizing that their companion is being overpowered in strength, one of the bandits uses a smokescreen to escape, leaving Alan unconscious. He is also kidnapped along with her, and upon waking up at the location, Alan uses his summons to examine the place. He notices that the bandits are guarding the two of them very closely, and they are currently in a warehouse. At that moment, the leader of the bandits named Dagera asks why they kidnapped two children when the agreement was for only one. They reply that the boy knows how to use a sword and that they will be able to make good money selling him. However, Dagera strikes the man and orders them never to act on their own again, warning that if the boy causes trouble, they must kill him immediately. After that, he leaves, and Alan understands that that man is much more dangerous than the others. Then the bandits begin to wonder why the boss hired that assassin for hire, which means that Dagera is not their true leader. One of the bandits replies that no one besides him could handle Suf, but the three of them begin to argue whether he could truly defeat him, because according to rumors, Dagera's entire battalion died because of Suf while he survived by fleeing like a coward, and in any case, he would have to be an idiot to face him directly. Hearing them, Alan wonders if there is some war happening elsewhere, but he has no time to lose. He searches for something in his inventory, but he panics upon realizing that he has lost his mithril sword. At that moment, one of the bandits decides to go to the bathroom, and Alan takes the opportunity to use one of his small birds to investigate outside. He wonders if he happens to be on a ship, but in the Granville territory there is no sea. He realizes that it is a gigantic ship, and upon looking through one of the windows, he is left in disbelief upon discovering that he is in the air. He wonders how he is going to escape from there, but he avoids panicking, as he needs to find a way to escape when they attempt to land. While he continues exploring, he notices that the royal emissary and Carnal are gathered, and he overhears the emissary saying that he used his influence to secure the extraction of the mithril. There is a high chance the Baron will cause a scandal in the capital, but Carnal replies that he does not need to worry about that, because he has already sent a warning so that the Baron does not do anything foolish, and in case he continues to refuse to sign the contract, he will simply send one of the arms of his beloved daughter. Alan can understand the entire situation, and precisely at that moment Sissel wakes up, leaving Alan with no choices left but to act. After optimizing his cards to face humans, he uses his moth to put the first man to sleep, and after freeing himself, the time for the counterattack arrives. The man with the eye patch tries to attack him, but Alan finishes all of them off easily. He goes to untie Cecil, but at that moment Dagera enters the warehouse, and in a single instant throws Alan violently. Impressed, Alan asks if that man teleported, and Dagera, seeing that Alan is quite troublesome, asks if he has never seen a skill before. But Alan does not want to waste time, and uses his bird to call out Dagera as if he were their leader. So he takes advantage of the distraction by using the spider webs, restricting his movements. He grabs Cecil and runs desperately for his life, summoning several defenders to block the path. But while running, he feels Dagera easily destroying his soldiers. Looking out the window, he notices a landing strip, so he imagines that they must be around 100 meters high. He warns Cecil that they have no other option but to jump. But first he increases his resistance to the maximum, using the blessings of his spider. Cecil screams for him not to jump, but he has no other option and, without thinking twice, ends up jumping. Upon landing, he feels intense pain, but fortunately, he uses one of his life leaves to recover. He then informs Cecil that it is time to return to the Granville mansion. Cecil is in shock and asks what all those monsters were, in addition to wanting to know how he is so strong and where he gets all those leaves from. However, Alan replies that they do not have time right now, and that it is best for her to climb onto his back so they can run away from there, and that is exactly what they do. The two manage to reach the city, and Alan uses his summons to track Dagera's movements. He notices that the man is pursuing them at high speed, so he begins to run in a zigzag pattern through the streets, scattering footprints everywhere. Alan realizes that Dagera possesses a tracking skill, but he is relieved because he only follows trails through footprints. Upon realizing this, he begins to jump across the rooftops. That way, he will not leave footprints on the streets. When they finally reach the walls, he uses his summons to run across them, and they end up being quite useful because they can float, which means Alan can run through the air. They advance several kilometers through the forest and then decide to rest. This is the moment when Cecil comments that his skill is extremely useful. Alan replies that, as she can see, his skill possesses many advantages. Curious, Cecil asks why he did not tell her this before. He responds that making it public would not bring anything good for him. She comments that this makes sense, and thus the night passes. Early the next morning, they continue running. Alan thinks that they must already be quite far from Carnal City, and upon sharing his vision with the birds he left behind, he observes Dagara and wonders if that idiot will not give up. However, upon seeing Dagara running at high speed around the city, he understands that at this rate, he will find their footprints very quickly. Therefore, he has no other options and needs to return to using his summons in the air, avoiding leaving trails. Even though this method is quite slow, it is the most effective, so he returns to using the same strategy. And so another day and a half passes, and they manage to reach the Granville border post. Relieved, the knights inform them that they will prepare a carriage. However, at that exact moment, Alan begins to run desperately upon discovering that Dagara has found their trail. And the most worrying part is that his birds have lost sight of him. So now Alan can no longer monitor him. Cecil asks if it would not be safer to remain with the knights. But Alan explains that at that border post, there are not enough knights to face someone like Dagara. Then Cecil proposes that he leave her behind so he can save himself. Hearing that, Alan understands that she is only 12 years old and is going through a situation that she cannot bear. She is already being destroyed by stress, which is why he reveals that he cannot abandon her, because he made a promise and does not intend to break it. Cecil asks what he is talking about. Alan reveals that Master Thomas, before departing, made him swear to protect her, and for that reason, he will do everything to ensure that both return in safety. Cecil begins to cry and thanks him, and thus another entire day passes. The next morning, Alan uses his life leaves to heal Cecil and informs her that they are only one day away from the Granville mansion. However, at that moment, thanks to one of the birds, that giant troll from before is detected, which immediately begins to chase them. Alan warns Cecil that they are now in an even worse situation because they are being pursued from both sides, and unlike Dagara, that troll will not hesitate to kill her if it gets close, so the best thing would be to face it. After that, Alan stops to wait for it, and when the monster emerges before him and begins to roar, Alan reminds Cecil that she must not leave her hiding place, and then begins to summon his entire arsenal to restrict the monster's movements. The bears begin to bite it from all sides, but they are not causing that much damage. The troll blocks Alan's iron ball and quickly destroys his summons. Meanwhile, Cecil is quite impressed. Discovering the way Alan fights against monsters, Alan utilizes his best summons, but the monster dispatches them with great ease and ends up capturing Alan. Cecil tries to go out to help him, but Alan stops her. He realizes that the troll is taking advantage of his suffering. As his life is decreasing rapidly, he uses his life leaves to keep himself alive. However, at that moment, the monster prepares to devour him, and upon hearing the bite, Cecil panics. But surprisingly, Alan remains alive. He summons his dagger and stabs the eye of the monster, but the creature tightens the bite even further. Alan comments that the monster was far too foolish to devour him, since now all of his enhancements are focused on health and endurance. He continues healing himself, and then, using all of his strength, finishes piercing the monster's eye, going through its brain and achieving victory. Alan becomes emotional, because after 3 years he has managed to defeat it. Cecil rushes over to him, relieved that he is still alive, but Alan reminds her that they are not safe yet. Then we see Dagara appearing at the location, warning Alan that he does not intend to leave him alive. Alan becomes quite worried because he is left without his iron balls and his dagger is embedded in the troll. Realizing this, he commands Cecil to run immediately, while he tries to hold him off. However, Dagara becomes irritated by his heroic attitude, and thus in an instant hurls him far away. Alan cannot understand how that man managed to get there so fast, while Dagara asks if he does not intend to use his monsters. He says he is going to have fun ending Alan's life for making him waste so much time. However, at that moment a huge explosion occurs, and Alan is quite impressed seeing that Cecil used magic. Very frightened, she thinks she needs to save him and launches another fireball. But Dagara dodges easily and with a single slap leaves Cecil unconscious, warning that she is lucky to be alive because he still needs her as a hostage. Alan begins to provoke him, saying that he is just garbage, a coward who fled the war only a year after it started, and asks if he now makes a living fighting children because he cannot face someone his own size. Alan says that he is pathetic, and an enraged Dagera begins to kick him repeatedly, asking if he truly thinks it is a good idea to provoke him when he no longer possesses any mana. Dagera prepares to end his life once and for all, but at that moment Alan merely smiles while healing himself using his life leaves. Irritated, Dagera asks what is so funny, and Alan replies that if he has already grown tired of him, he can now play with someone else, and this time he will not be able to escape. Then we see Suf entering the battlefield, carrying one of Alan's small birds on his shoulder, while Alan thinks that he sent his summons after Suf as soon as they reach the Granvelle territory, and hopes that now he will give that idiot a beating. Suf draws his sword, while Dagera comments that nobles are garbage and knights are worms that live beneath them. He recalls that the famous Suf protected the border for 10 years, and his only reward was becoming the captain of a bunch of useless people. Dagera also states that his own companions died because they were incompetent, and that now he will take the opportunity to kill him and have his revenge. Dagera advances against Suf, trying to strike him, but is left in disbelief upon realizing that his armor is extremely powerful. Suf maintains his calm, and then begins to release a powerful aura, while commenting that his companions also died on the battlefield merely fulfilling their duties, and that he will not allow a useless, third-rate thief to tarnish their memory. Alan is impressed to see that Suf has activated his extra skill, and then, with a powerful strike of his sword, he destroys everything in front of him, cutting Dagera in half. Alan is left jaw-dropped. Some time later, upon arriving at the Granvelle mansion, everyone comes out emotionally to receive them, while Alan can now breathe in peace. Later, the Baron informs his family that Carnal was behind the kidnapping of Lady Cecil, and after losing the economic benefit of his mithril mines, he made a special agreement with the royal messenger to steal half of Granvelle's mining rights. But for the plan to work, they needed to ensure that the Baron would never tell the king about the contract, which is why they took Cecil hostage. Upon discovering this, the Baron immediately orders Sebas to prepare a carriage, because he intends to depart for the capital at that very instant. Alan respectfully asks how he intends to resolve the matter, and the Baron says that he is going to tell the king everything. However, Alan responds that he should reconsider. He is certain that Viscount Carnal will receive what he deserves, but he doubts very much that the royal messenger will suffer any consequences, so he proposes to relinquish the percentage of the rights to the mithril mine that he received and use that as a bargaining chip to convince the king to conduct a full investigation. This way, the Baron will be able to resolve the problem in his favor. Indignant, the Baron asks if Alan is suggesting that he bribe the royal family. Alan confirms, saying that this was exactly what he meant, because Carnal and the royal messenger wanted to line their pockets without getting their hands dirty, while the real men are working the land, hunting monsters, and doing the dirty work with their own hands, because that is how a family is truly protected. Alan says that his family needs him at that moment, and that now is the time to act like a true man. At that instant, Sebas intervenes, warning that Alan is crossing the line, but the Baron interrupts, admitting that Alan is right. Because of his noble lineage, he always felt the obligation to follow the correct and honorable path, and precisely for that reason, they always took advantage of him. Now he will seize the opportunity offered by Alan with the mining rights to bribe the king. Thus, time passes, and later we see that the Baron informed the king about the kidnapping of his daughter. All those responsible were punished, and Carnal's fief was dissolved, coming under royal control. Later, this event became known as the Granvelle incident. Because of everything that happened, the Baron allows Cecil and Alan to attend a conversation regarding the details of the duty of nobles, now gathered with the Lord. He warns them that everything they hear on that day cannot leave that room. He then shows a map of the world, explaining that they are on the central continent in the kingdom of Latash. To the north, there is a massive country known as the Jayamut Empire. And even though the kingdom of Latash has been invaded by the empire in the past, currently the two live in peace. However, that is only the history that the public knows, because the true timeline is known as the history of the Demon King. It began in the Forgotten Continent, where the Demon King appeared for the first time 112 years ago, proclaiming himself the Demon King of the End and demanding that the leaders of each country submit to his rule. Obviously, no one accepted, so 62 years later, a great calamity occurred. The Demon King finally went on the offensive, invading the central continent with an army composed of millions of rank B or higher monsters. Because of this, countless people died, and 4 countries were erased from the map in just 4 years. The invasion also spread to other places, and the army of the Demon King attacked the dwarf empire of Botchais and the continent of the elves, Jotunheim. Faced with this dangerous threat, the Jayamut Empire took the lead to form the Alliance of the 5 Continents, which gave rise to a system that required each country to establish an academy, and every child blessed with a gift had to receive training before being sent to the front lines of the battle. Unfortunately, this was not enough to halt the invasion, and the Jayamut Empire lost a quarter of its territory, making everyone believe that the end was near. Until suddenly the hero known as Helmios was born in the empire and restored hope to humanity. Helmios was the first person to possess the hero talent, which allowed the war to change drastically. And even currently at just 22 years of age, he continues leading the war on the front lines. Alan remembers that when he chose his difficulty, the Demon King and Hero classes existed, and both had a 5-star difficulty, which probably means that these 2 classes decide the fate of the world. Now everything makes sense to Alan. The mandatory service for all nobility or royalty of those who are born with talent requires 3 years of military service against the army of the Demon King. A war that continues to be extremely intense, and even with the hero on their side, half of the young soldiers sent to the battlefield die. After that, the Baron thanks Alan for everything he did for his family, and as a reward, he delivers 3 bags of gold, 1 for defeating that troll and a bonus for bringing back his daughter. Alan then asks why there are 3 bags. The Baron confesses that he asked the king to exempt his daughter from military service, but since her talent is extremely valuable, the king did not accept. Alan understands, since Cecil's talent is very important for the battlefield, which is why the Baron asks Alan to accept the 600 gold coins that are before him and accompany his daughter to the academy, protecting her on the battlefield. He knows that Alan possesses some kind of talent, and that gives him the right to enter the academy, so he asks if he could do that. Alan states that his talent requires overcoming an extreme ordeal in exchange for an incomparable power granted by the god of creation, revealing himself to be a summoner. The Baron is impressed, while Alan tells him to rest assured, because he will do everything possible to protect Cecil. However, Alan wants to make some changes, and in exchange for 400 gold coins, he asks that his family and Krina's family be exempt from taxes. And finally, he also wants to resign from his position as a servant, because he wishes to become an independent person. But he will continue protecting Cecil in the exact same way. The Baron accepts, as he already expected this, and asks Sebas to deliver something to him. Sebas hands him a dagger, and the Baron reveals that he has been promoted to Viscount, and that this happened in large part thanks to Alan. For this reason, he grants him that weapon, turning Alan into an official guest of the family, a proof that the Granvelles will always support him regardless of the situation. And as the head of the Granvelle family, he feels proud to welcome him as a guest of honor. Alan expresses his gratitude, thinking that ever since he arrived in that world, there was something that had always bothered him. The reason why he reincarnated in that world instead of just being transported. But now he understands that there was a reason for it. First, he was born as a servant, which led him to hunt boars, and later he entered the service of the Baron. All of this was a process to gain experience, because he would never have been able to face the academy nor acquire the necessary skills to face the Demon King otherwise. Alan understands that the god of creation was always looking for someone like him, willing to face the hellish challenge of reincarnation. And since the Demon King remains a threat even after the arrival of the hero, they need him to be able to restore the balance in that world. And now, satisfied with his experiences, Alan accepts the challenge, and thus the anime ends. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you made it this far, comment, life, a kiss from Bat Kun.